2:08, right on time. Let's see what we're doing here. Okay, this is all charged up. Probably should plug this in case we need it. 1 second. Maybe clip this on my shirt, huh? Okay. That should be better. There's a few firsts. I figured a few would show up here in a moment. Let me plug this wire in. Just a second. Ugh, I can't see. All right, that's plugged in. Look, I ruined all the lighting. It's terrible now. Alrighty, hi everyone. Someone said, I'm here and I've already forgot my question. That's great. It looks like we have good audio. If anything, it might be too loud. Let me turn it down a scotch. And for now, I'll just get this plugged in case we need the phone for some reason. And I am waiting to hear back from Andrea. Let's see if she replied yet. No, not yet. So we're waiting for her response. And in the meantime, so many windows are appearing on my screen. No, I don't want to download any updates. Not now. All right, here we go. Hey, last week I started this off a little differently, and I kind of want to continue that theme. I'd really like to hear how you guys have been holding up this last week. I know there's been a lot of changes, and there's been some people that are happy with the changes. Some are very discontented. But basically, you personally, not something you heard from a friend, how are you holding up? How's your tank doing? Are you on top of everything now and it's doing great? Are you planning to, I'm going to be a little bit rude here and say waste your stimulus check if you're in the US to buy equipment? Because I feel like it's really important that if you do get money, that you use it to pay your rent and your utilities, so you don't go homeless or run without, have no power or electricity, power or water. I mean, these are, or internet. We need the internet, right? So it's really important. I don't think I'm getting one, so I'm not worrying about that. But for you guys, I do worry about that. So I hope that you'll be okay. Let me turn off a light behind me. I was trying to, as usual, mess with the lights on the tank to make it look less hideous. We'll turn this off real quick, and then we'll turn that back on in a moment. So, all right, so let me look at some of your answers. Let's see. Oh, I see a lot of names I recognize. So this is my Eat, Sleep, Reef, Repeat shirt. I got this from a guy about 1.5 years ago, and he made a few of these versions on Amazon. And so I got this one, and I don't know where it wouldn't be that hard to look up. You type in Eat, Sleep, Reef, Repeat t-shirt, and I'm sure you'll find it on Amazon if you want something like that. Okay, so let's see if I can find something in here. I want to turn this back on now. Okay. Trucker Tammy says, I like the volume loud because I'm driving a truck. Streaming it through the speakers. I had someone yesterday on my YouTube channel write to me in all caps, and you guys know, when someone types in all caps, that means they're yelling. And they said, can you turn on the closed captioning because I don't know English? But they shouted it. And it was on a video that I'd done like 5 years ago. And I'm thinking, if YouTube hasn't generated closed captioning for that by this point, it's probably not going to happen. So I apologize to that person that it's not available in your language or that it has all the words underneath. I don't think I'll ever have time to go back and do things like that. I mean, who knows? But I just don't see it happening anytime soon. All right, let's see. One of you said that you are testing, or that you're surviving in Chicagoland. That's good. One person asked me, did you test the water before your stream? I'm like, no, I had things to do. But here are my last measurements that I did test. So that was a few days ago. But I need to do it today. So I'll be doing it after the stream. And Ben says, literally going to the GFO, the LFS to get GFO today, so this is perfect timing. David says he tested negative for COVID-19. I've seen pictures originally, how they put a Q-tip all the way up your nose. Is that literally how they test, or is that just some fake news story? That's the worst part. You don't know what to believe. I literally don't. I have opinions, but I don't know what to believe. Let's see. I already have a question here. Well, I have a couple questions. So Alfredo says, my anemones don't like it when I use lanthanum, even with a 5 micron sock. Do yours tolerate it? Well, yeah, they've been through it so many times. And I dose at night. Maybe you're dosing during the daytime, and so you're there to observe that they're not happy or something. I mean, they close up at night anyway, mostly. So I dose always after lights out. We'll be talking about that here in a little bit. Macy's daddy says, I'm battling cyano and treated with ChemiClean. It's still there after, so it still exists. Do I do a water change and treat again in a few days, or do I dose again now? You dose again now. And then, in 3 more days, then you will turn on your protein skimmer, you'll do your big water change, you will deal with the collection cup overflowing, you can run some fresh carbon. But you want to completely nuke and get rid of the cyano completely before you do a water change. Okay. Ian says, he says, what's the correct amount of GFO you should use in your tank at one time, please? So if you don't do a change to damage your tank and cause any chaos with your corals. That we are going to be going into. And I'm just looking for more of your stories here. Oh, by the way, if you're not aware of it, if it hasn't come across your social media, Jim from the TV show The Office is doing a weekly show on YouTube called Some Good News, and it's really great. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, I highly recommend you do it. If you haven't, you can binge through 3 of them plus some behind the scenes stuff. It's a lot of fun, and he's doing it from his house, like everyone, and it's really neat. And by the way, I don't know about you guys, I've been, for the most part, ignoring the news, but I record a lot of television shows, and during the commercial breaks, there'll be a pop-up of coming up on the news at 10. And I actually kind of like seeing these reporters in their living rooms rather than being on set. And I was wondering how you guys felt about that, because I thought it was kind of neat. Maybe I'm just liking it because it's a change of pace. Derby City says he's caught up on all his bills and is now ordering stuff for his tank. That's good. That's excellent. Vit says, do you have any Aptasia in your reef? And I do have like 2 in the back of the big coral behind the Shadowcaster. I need to kill it. And then there's a whole bunch in the anemone cube, but they're anemones, so it kind of makes sense, but they're still hideous, and I need to get my arm wet, and I haven't done it. And it's my own fault. I was actually thinking, if I were to ever attack this tank and really solve it, I'll be showing that tank off all the time. You'll be sick of seeing it. Trevor says, mine and my daughter's tanks are looking great, and it's nice to have this time to clean, clean, clean. Right, exactly. Not only are you cleaning things and making things better and finally doing those projects you always wanted to do, you're there when something goes wrong to solve it instantly, and that's a huge benefit. Some of us are, I don't know. Maybe people just like to complain just for the sake of complaining because it makes them feel better. But, people are saying I'm sick of being at home, or I'm stir crazy, and I'm a very big homebody. I love being at home. And when I stick my head outside, I'm like, oh, the weather's gorgeous today. And then the next day, oh, the weather's freezing. And then the next day, oh, the weather's so hot. But, I'll be inside, and I'm very content inside my little home. And I don't go stir crazy. I don't get cabin fever. I don't need to get out there. I can do just as well. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm an introvert, but I sure act like one. Let's see. Thank you for answering that. Adam says they actually do the Q-tip all the way up your nose till where your eyes hurt. Wow. And another person said they tested negative. That's awesome. It's so funny that negative is good, right? I think I mentioned The Office before. I've been watching The Office. I've been streaming it because it's on Netflix. And I think I'm in season 2 or well, I'm in season 3 now. And someone got a report back that they didn't have cancer. And he said, he gets off the phone and he says it was negative. And everyone's like a big sigh of relief. And then Michael Scott is like, I am so sorry, And then he turns to when he does that cameo to the camera and he said, apparently in the medical community, negative is a good thing. It was really funny. All right, Screams Reef, I'll answer your question, then we're going to get into our topic. But I do want to, I kind of enjoying all this interaction right off the bat. So he says, I sent out for an ICP test and it came back with high levels of aluminum. Any idea what could be adding aluminum to my tank? I'm pretty sure none of my equipment has aluminum in it. But if you're using ceramic blocks, or if you're using the orbs, these different shapes that they sell to remove nitrate and phosphate, some of those do have aluminum in them. And by removing that from your system, you may solve the problem. Tammy says, I wasted 80% of my stimulus on bills. Good girl. And 10% on the tank. Well, then where's the other 10? Did you save it? Trevor says, are spaghetti worms good? Yes, they are. I like them. I like them a lot, actually. And when you don't see them, it's kind of like, oh, where are they at? Robert's saying they tested his water already. Good job for water test Saturday. You're on it. Said that apart from potassium being 335 and iron being 0.05, how do I raise both ASAP? Well, you don't have to raise them quickly. You just need to gradually raise them up. So you'll need potassium and you'll need iron and you'll need to follow the directions and you need to be able to test for what you're doing. So if you have a test kit, you'll know what you're adding and you'll be able to verify. And it's always better to underdose than to overdose. Let's see. All right, I think I'm going to stop at this point here. But thank you very much for answering some of my questions initially, guys. That's great. I'll come back to this. I want to talk about GFO. And the reason I want to talk about this topic finally after all of these years is because I do not use it. However, I do have some knowledge of its use. And I know a lot of you do use it. Matter of fact, many of you will set up a tank, and one of the first things you're told is protein skimmer, GFO reactor, salt, and you go out and buy all these things and hook them up in fear that you may one day get phosphate, and you want to avoid it at all costs because you've heard that hair algae is a horror story. Okay, so number one, in all the years that I've been reef keeping, I've never, ever, ever feared phosphate. It is what it is. Just like salinity is what it is. And if it's not right, you want to correct it. But I've never thought, oh my God, the phosphates are so high, my tank is going to die. That's never entered my head. Even when I had weird accidents in the past where an auto feeder dumped in all the food for an entire month in one day. And my phosphate shot up to 3.0, which is very, very high. I Googled it back then, or maybe I asked Randy Holmes Farley and said to him, this accident happened, how do I bring it down to something normal in a relatively quick time? And he pointed me to one of his articles where it stated once you hit 3.0, it actually will basically impregnate the rock, or what do you call it? Is that the right word? It'll just get totally into the rock and into the sand, and then even as you remove it, it keeps leaching out of the rock and out of the sand for a long time. So you remove it from the water, and then you test, and suddenly it shows present again because it came out of the rock. And you have to keep doing this over and over until you finally get it all out of the system. And, that's kind of the ordeal. But that's happened to me 2 or 3 times. And even then, I was like, okay, so it's 3.0. And I got it down, through using Phosphate Rx, and I knocked it down. And, a couple weeks later, it was down and stayed down. And that's how it's supposed to be. I was dosing that every couple of days until I got it under control. And this is what I was just talking about, Phosphate Rx. And it's just in a little eyedropper bottle. And it's what I use instead of GFO. But this topic is about GFO. So let's get into some of the things you need to know. For example, you would need some kind of a reactor to put it in. This is a Two Little Fishies Phosphate reactor. He actually was probably one of the first companies to come out with GFO. Maybe. Maybe it was just all in the same around, same time period. But I do remember, there was brands out there by Tunzi, which I think was called Silphos. There was Roaphos from DD Aqua Solutions. DD Aquarium Solutions. And then Phosban came out, which was this brown powder. Now, the difference between Phosban and other GFO, which stands for granular ferric oxide, which is basically rust. The GFO from Roaphos and from Tunzi were moist, and it had to stay moist. And if it dried out, it was no good. GFO, on the other hand, was a powder. It looks like coffee grounds, basically, but it was very loose, like dirt, and it wasn't moist at all. And you would take the reactor of some kind, and so he made this reactor. Let's open it up. And there's other reactors. And I have strong opinions on this topic. I'm going to try to rein it in a little bit. But here is, sorry, I just started unpacking it for myself instead of for you guys. So here is your instruction sheet that shows how it works. Here's what's within. So you've got a reactor. And it's got a cardboard packaging here to hold some parts in place. This is the reactor. You got your water going in, and you've got the water coming out. You've got a hanger here to hang it on the side of your tank, or on your sump, but it could hang on a tank on the back. Then you've got your awesome warranty card. Boy, you can tell when I bought this. Production date 2017. Yeah. So here is a small packet that has some zip ties, and the zip ties are important. You've got a cutoff valve inline. You've got a hose clamp, a plastic hose clamp, by the way. We should talk about those later. Don't let me forget. And then he came out with these things later. When the first reactor came out, it wasn't like this, and it got better, and it was really nice. So he came out with these rubber boots. They're soft, and they press right onto the reactor. So there's 2 of those, and then there's 2 of these nipples that go on. And you would take your reactor, you just unscrew the top. Inside is a rubber O-ring. There used to be a flat gasket in there, now it's an O-ring. You've got your top piece, your sponge, and your main upright rod. So this right here is what water's going to flow through. And you're going to set this down inside the reactor. You're going to put the GFO in there. This has to press all the way down. Got nothing handy. Here we'll go with this. Okay. You've got, this is to hang it on the side of the sump or the tank, or inside the sump if you can. You can hang it inside. And then this is a screw to keep it hanging level so it's not leaning like this or being out too far. You can just adjust it to where it's hanging correctly. When you put your GFO in there, you're going to have to cover this hole on this tube so none of it gets in the tube in the first place. You don't want any inside the base. You want it to be on top of the sponge material. And you're going to put in a fixed amount. Now, depending on what brand of GFO you use, you're going to get directions on the package saying how much you need per gallon, or per 50 gallons, or per 100 gallons. And that way you can determine what your tank needs. And that's not a very specific thing because it's sort of like a rule of thumb. And then, like with everything in this hobby, a lot of times when people say, I got a Phosban reactor, or I got a I've got a GFO reactor of some kind, and I've got this media, how much do I use? People say, whatever it says, use 25%. And there's nothing wrong with that advice because it's a safety margin to not overdo it. But you want to put in the right amount for your tank, or less, and see how things go. And then if you decide, wow, it's not doing anything, I need to increase the volume, you can. But if you use too much and you strip out all the phosphates out of your tank, you'll end up with issues like the video we had a week ago about dinoflagellates. And we don't want to run into that at all. So we do everything we can to be balanced and not overdo anything. We don't want to strip the water too much. We want to remove and maintain. Now, the product that I was going to show you, I don't have any Phosphate handy, but I have this one here from Emmy Coral. And this is his GFO. And it's just a powdered bag. And honestly, someone today is going to get this because I want it off my shelf. So you can put in the comments, GFO. And Andrea hopefully will pick someone from you guys to give them that. Let me see if she ever replied to me. Okay, I need to make a quick announcement. So last week I was giving away a Blu-ray and a DVD of a coral adventure. And this went to Tim Wood and Derby City Reefer. Both those people were chosen last week and did not give us their shipping information, so we couldn't do anything. So if you're listening now to this stream, I need you to get a hold of Andrea, and I need you to let me know which one you were getting. One person was getting a Blu-ray, the other one was getting DVD, because that's the two I have. So I would hate to do the wrong direction. We need to get the right disc to the right person for the right player so they can play it. And so if you could please get a hold of her here in the chat. There will be some kind of an email you have to do. And then once you've got that worked out, I will be able to ship it out this week. And the same thing will happen with this GFO. So she will pick someone out, and that person will get this bag of GFO. Now on this one here, the instructions say, use 1 cup of this media per 60 to 70 gallons of water. And it says in here, use it in a reactor or a media bag. And it says to rinse. And that is what I was going to say next. So we've got your tube, you pour in your GFO into here, and now you've got this rusty metal in here. Then you need to hook up the rest of it, so you'd put your sponge back on top. This is so much easier when it's full of media than when it's an empty one. Can't do it. Can't do it. Forget it. Pretend the sponge is in there, please. And we put this back on top. Install your elbow. Install your other elbow. Then you would put in the connection nipple. And your other one. And then what's going to happen is you're going to then hook up tubing to some kind of a very small power head, like a MaxiJet 600 or something, because you're going to need something like around 90 gallons an hour going through this, maybe even less. And you control it with the pinch valve. So by turning this valve slightly, you can limit how much flow is going through the tube, obviously, as you open and close it. And you're wanting to limit how much goes through. You only want the GFO in the reactor to tumble slightly. It should not be going everywhere. And it shouldn't be dead silent either. It's got to have dead stagnant. It should look like it's moving just a little bit, like a little tiny earthquake. Or I like to call it a moonquake because it's like a slow motion effect. And then you've got to hook it up to some water, whether it's water from your reef, and then the tube coming out of the reactor would go into a nearby bucket. Do not rinse the media inside your system. You've got to rinse it out really well. And the simplest system, honestly, is to have your tank water go into the reactor effluent coming out into a nearby bucket, and you're going to drain maybe 1 or 2 gallons of water through the reactor to make sure any kind of fines, which is the small metal shavings, any fines that came out will be caught in the bucket and you throw it away. Then you can just take the tube and you can move it back inside your sump where it normally exports, and it's running. And you're done. I mean, that's the part. Now, if you were to not rinse it first, you could actually sting your corals, and it may even bother the gills of some fish. So it's really important it's rinsed. If you choose to rinse it by the sink, and then you disconnect it all and you bring it over to your tank and you hook it up, when you first turn it on, it's going to burp air through it, which is releasing the fines again. So it's really important to really, I mean, honestly, the best approach is going to be hook it up back in the sump where it belongs or on the back of your tank, hook up the pump to feed it, slow the flow to the correct rate, let it drain into a nearby bucket for, I don't know how long that takes, a couple minutes? I don't know, I can't remember. It was too long ago. And after you've collected about 2 gallons and the water looks nice, and so what'll happen is you'll have the media down here. When you turn it on, it gets a little muddy, and then it settles, and you'll just have this media down at the bottom, and this will all be crystal clear through here. And you want that to be clear, because you want the liquid coming out of the reactor to be clear. And that's why the benefit of the extra sponges and so forth are in there to help in that regard. If you do all those things, then you should see decent results. And the reason people like a GFO reactor in the first place is because it's constantly removing a little bit of phosphate. Now, how do you know if it's working or not, or how do you know what flow rates you need to go through the media, is by testing the effluent coming out of the reactor. So all you have to do is take a sample of what's coming out of the tube, do a phosphate test, and it should measure lower than the phosphates in your tank. So let's just say your phosphates are 0.1 ppm, and you install a phosphate, or keep saying phosphate, the phosband reactor or similar reactor, and you end up using some kind of GFO or phosband. When you hook it up, ideally you want to have the flow going through it so slowly that the liquid coming out of the reactor measures 0. And that way water going in is 0.1 and water coming out is 0, and over a course of time you will see the number come down lower and lower in the tank because the GFO is absorbing it and removing it from the system. And that is how you know if it's working correctly. If you, let's say you tested your tank and it's 0.1, and then you tested your reactor's effluent and it was 0.25, then that means your GFO media is completely done. Or the water's going through the reactor too quickly and it doesn't have a chance to do anything at all. But really, if the number's higher than the tank, it's not doing anything, and it's time to replace the media. And that's the other part about GFO, is that you have to stay on top of it and you have to replace it. It's not something that can be ignored. So if you were to use a fixed amount of GFO and, well, I don't want to jump ahead. I want to stay on this. Okay, so we're still talking about the initial setup phase, and then what happens, let's just say during the first week. It's one of the pieces of advice that Julian Sprung made when he made this reactor is he told his customers that it would be really good once a week to open the valve fully and close it, put it back to its normal level, just to kind of send a puff through the media so it doesn't turn solid. And the reason it turns solid is sometimes alkalinity levels, when they're higher in the tank, can actually solidify the GFO and turn it into a brick. And that's really hard to get out of the reactor. So if you were to go to a reactor, it's all set perfectly, it's all doing its job correctly. Once a week, you just kind of open the valve fully and you send a rush of water through it, and then close it down again. You won't release the fines because it's already established media, and you've puffed it once, and now you can get back to that normal moonquake I was describing. Try to remember to do that on a regular basis. If you don't, if you forget, or you just don't think it's important or whatever, you may run into a day where your media just turns into a brick and you're having to chip it out with a screwdriver. I mean, that's just what happens. But that was one tip that I thought was really important. Then, when you're trying to maintain a certain level of GFO, a certain level of phosphate in your tank using GFO, you'll have to find that sweet spot. And this is something that's going to always be changing. You may discover for your size tank, let's say it's a 100-gallon tank, and you've discovered that 1 cup of GFO does a great job of keeping your phosphates under 0.1. Let's say it tends to keep them around 0.03 or 0.05 or 0.08 or something like that. And it always works out well. Well, that's great until you add a bigger bioload. And when you add more fish to the system, you may discover you need 1.25 cups of GFO, or you might need 1.5 cups. And it might have lasted you 3 months initially, but later it's barely keeping up with 2 months. That's just part of bigger bioload, and that's just math. So don't sit there and say, well, it always worked before for 3 months. I'm getting ripped off. This is bad media. That's probably not the case. It's probably just things have changed. You're feeding more heavily. You've got more fish. You've got bigger fish. Your corals are growing out. Things are changing all the time in our systems. And so we have to adapt. And you may decide, I don't need this much GFO. I need less, actually. And so you're going to find that sweet spot, and you're going to follow that routine. Now, GFO is not inexpensive. I find it to be relatively expensive. And some people like to buy it in bulk. And so they'll get a big bucket of it. You know, it's like a bucket with a bag. And it's really important that when you take out what you need, that you seal the bag and put a lid on the bucket and keep it tight so it stays moist, like I talked about earlier. Because if it dries out, you end up, it's wasted. And why buy it in bulk if you're going to waste it? So make sure that you're taking good care of your unused product so you'll have it available later to use. If you, well, I'm trying to think this through. Like I said, I haven't used GFO in forever. I mean, I used it way back in 2004, and I used it I used a bunch of different brands over a 9-month period and just did not have success with it. I tried everything I could with it. I did every instruction they said, and it didn't work. And then later on, I came across something totally different, which is lanthanum chloride, which I adore. And that's what I've been using ever since because it works for me. But everyone's got something different going on, and everyone's got a different setup. And so what works for me hopefully works for you, but if it doesn't, you have another option. Like in the case, Mark uses lanthanum, or he uses Phosphate Rx. And you might say, you are saying, I use GFO and it works great. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with you finding another method that works. All we care about is that you find something that works that will make your tank succeed and thrive and look great. Now, if you were to not do anything and just ignore your phosphate entirely, no reactors, no Phosphate Rx, what happens is that the phosphate and of course nitrate and other stuff just continues to rise, and so you control it through water changes, and that is the other option. And with the smaller tanks, like let's say you have a Pico that's like 3 gallons or 6 gallons, and all you have, and you don't have room for all these things. I mean, this is bigger than the Pico, right? You just change water, and that's it. You don't worry about trying to hook up something to process the water. But side note, this can be used for more than just GFO. I mean, I know it says it's a Phosband reactor, but you could put carbon in this. And this is a very inexpensive reactor to put carbon in and filter your water. And this could be hooked up temporarily to a small aquarium, like a BioCube or something similar. You hook up a power head, you send it through the carbon, and then you have it go back in the tank, and you have it hanging on the side of the tank or standing on the stand. However, you can get it where it's safe. And then a day later, just remove it. Your water looks a little bit more clear. So that's a side benefit to using these little reactors. And I think that one is like 30 bucks. I mean, it's not expensive. There's more expensive ones on the market, obviously. This one's probably been around the longest. And it is nice because you just unscrew the top to change out the media, where a lot of them use thumb screws. You have to loosen them and pull the top off, remove it, grease the O-ring. It's a little bit more effort involved. That's why I ordered this one specifically to run carbon on the frag system, and I still haven't used it. Can GFO be reused? Can it be recharged? No. But one crazy friend of mine, who goes by the name Just Incredible, did something really neat. He used to work he used to work as a teacher. And it was some kind of science lab type thing, and he was actually teaching kids about chemistry and corals, and it was really interesting. And I was walking through his crazy lab, and I was looking at, how all the gear works. And on the edge of the sump was a glass aquarium that had about this much liquid in it. So it's like, let's say it's a 10-gallon tank, and it had, like a half an inch of liquid in there, and the bottom was just disgusting. And I'm looking at that, and I was like, is that GFO? And he said, yes. And I said, is it done? He says, oh yeah, that's all used GFO. And what he was doing, and I thought it was actually kind of awesome. He would take all the used GFO and throw it in the 10-gallon aquarium, and then he'd add a little water, and it would just rust. And then he hooked up airline tubing from the bottom of that tank and let it siphon drip, very slow drip, into his refugium to provide iron for the macroalgae to grow, and it worked really well. So he found a way to reuse GFO in a way none of us would probably ever think of. And, because, like someone said earlier, my iron is low, how do I increase it? We buy a bottle of iron. Well, he just rusts his own GFO and uses a drip method to add a few drops of this over, I don't know how long it took to drain that tank into the refugium, but it was a really cool idea. So I'm not telling you to go out and do that necessarily, but it was kind of an interesting thing to come across. And it was in a science lab type thing where they keep an eye on it constantly. It's not just like something you threw under your tank and had this brilliant moment and you can ignore it. There's a lot of things in this hobby we cannot ignore. We have to stay on top of it. And that's why I was kind of asking you guys at the beginning of this stream, you know, how's your tank doing? Is it the cleanest it's ever been? You know, have you been fixing all those things you've always wished you could that you've been holding off on? And this is the perfect time to kind of get everything sorted. Now, I think I've pretty much covered everything on this topic. And I just want to recap really quick. So you put in the proper amount in the reactor based on the instructions or less. You rinse it. Then you set it up to trickle out slowly. And you make sure that the media is barely moving. And then you want to make sure that the effluent is coming out as measuring less than the water going in. Hopefully it's coming out at 0 or near 0. And that way you know it's polishing it out. And then when, you know, if you want to know is the reactor still working, 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, you can measure the effluent. If it's coming out at the same amount or even coming out higher and it's leaching out again, it's time to replace it. So I think that pretty much covers it. And I'm going to be looking through the questions. A lot of times when we do one topic, you know, at the beginning of the live stream, later on you guys will say things. I'm like, oh yeah, that's one more thing that I forgot to mention. And so, you know, if you're tuning out at this point, you may miss out on some tidbits that come up here in the rest of the stream. All right. So let me go to some of your questions. And then I'm going to change gears and go back to my lanthanum topic that I like so much because we're talking about controlling phosphates today. Don't let me step on this wire. All right. I'm just writing out a dryer real quick. All right. Coral Lovers says, I have a new frag tank for 3 months and my corals are not doing great in it. The PO4 and NO3, which is phosphate and nitrate, are 0. I'm feeding fish many times and that doesn't seem to help. What else can I do? Well, it's a young tank. You said it's 3 months old. And you didn't say what kind of corals you have. You didn't say what kind of fish you have. It may just need more time to settle in. And hopefully your corals will, I mean, think about it, 3 months, that's not very long. A lot of times it takes a coral a couple of months to get used to our system before it starts to do anything. And you know, you've set up this brand new system. So it just may be, you need some more time. Take your time. Don't strip the water like too much with like a lot of GFO. Don't over skim it. You know, we just want to, you know, just everything should be balanced. It's really important. Jamie says, things are pretty much okay. I went to the LFS today and a strange experience. Only able to ask for stuff. You can't browse. I came home with a roller mat and fitted it with no more filter socks. Hallelujah. Yeah, filter socks are no fun. Oh, I wanted to show you guys something I made for myself. And then we'll continue with some more of your questions. So I made this little bracket. And you can see it's got a little tab right here. And there's a solid piece on top. And then there's a drop down. This is the part I needed. So this is going to go under my aquarium stand. And there are the rails that holds the walkboard in place. And those rails are welded in. And I wanted to connect my breakout box, which is part of my apex, somewhere around that area. So I'm going to put this under the stand, on top of the rail, and drop it down. It's just going to hang. And then I'm going to use double stick tape. I have this red stuff that's amazing from 3M that's made for wet environments. And I'm going to glue the breakout box to this piece of acrylic, and it'll just hang there nicely. And then if I ever need to work on it, I can just unhook it, pull it toward me, change the screws, add a new wire, whatever I'm going to do, and then tighten it up, and then put it back and hang it, and it will not fall into the sump. It'll be safe. And so I made this thing for myself, little guy, and later on I'll show pictures probably on Instagram and Facebook showing it installed. I mean, it's not much to look at, but it's something fun that I needed to do. When I had my tank sitter does a lot of maintenance work. He's excellent. And he was out here recently for a lot of electrical things I needed done. And I asked him to change out the wiring from my big buttons that I use to feed the tank, to turn on lights temporarily. I even have a water change button that is very dusty. And I had these huge, thick speaker wires going under my stand. It was just ugly. And I said, I just want those gone. I want one Cat 5 cable with those super fine wires. And I said, can we just do that? And he was like, yep. And he was under there for, I don't know, 7 minutes and got that completely changed out. And then I was able to remove this hideous speaker wire. And now the breakout box is just kind of hanging there. And so I need to get this little guy to hold it in place. So that is one of my little projects I wanted done on the tank. It's nice to get some of these things done. It helped put some money in his pocket during the this time when people are unemployed. And so I've been trying to give him some jobs to do on the side. And I'm really glad that got done. That was one of my things. I wanted to do it myself, like, I don't know, a year ago. And then when I had him doing all this other stuff, I said, hey, while you're here. And so he went ahead and took care of that for me, and that was nice. Steve Smith says, I know the difference between wet and dry skimming, but are there any scenarios to using one over the other? Yes, there actually is. Most of the time we would think, I just need it to skim. But I tend to lean on the dry skimming approach with my tank, and I'm reasonably certain that's probably one of the reasons why my nitrates have been such a thing with my tank. Because as we export some solution, some dirt, the dissolved organic compounds, or DOCs, as we remove those, we are actually making the water better. And my waste collector used to fill up, I don't know, every week. And I've got the skimmer tuned a little bit too well to where it takes 2 or 3 weeks to actually fill up. The waste collector holds like 1.5 gallons, maybe more. I've never measured it, but it holds quite a bit. And if I were to skim more wet and have it collect more skimmate every single week, my tank would probably do better in that regard, in that area. The livestock doesn't seem to care, but the numbers aren't great on my test kit. And you guys know I've been working on this for some time. And when I was running no-pox, it was only near the end, I'd been doing it for months and not having much luck. Someone made the point, are you wet skimming? And I was like, oh, no, I have not been doing that. And they said, yeah, that might help. And because I was telling you guys I couldn't stand all the webs that were everywhere in my sump, and they were all inside my Vortec pumps, and they were inside the overflow box. I mean, it was so weird. And people say, well, that just proves you're using too much. I'm like, well, the numbers aren't coming down, and I'm following the directions. Actually, I never used as much as I was required to dose. It was always less than. Like if it said to use 56 milliliters, I used 40. So I never even used the full amount that was recommended. And it was not for me. I didn't like it. Just like someone might say, I'm a GFO guy, lanthanum is not for me. And I understand that, and that's fine. I'm just saying it didn't work for me. But the point being that if I'd wet skimmed, maybe I would have had better results with removing nitrate from the water, possibly. And that's one of those things that I didn't find out about until the end. So when you are doing anything in your tank that involves exporting, such as treating for phosphate, running no-pox, even carbon dosing, you might want to wet skim. And you have to realize that every time you take water out of the tank through the protein skimmer, your top off is going to replace it with fresh water, which could, in theory, affect salinity depending on the volume of the aquarium. So if you have a smaller tank, like let's say a 29 gallon, and you're wet skimming, you may need to really watch your salinity more closely than someone with 450 gallons on their hands, where salinity, it takes a lot to make a dent in my salinity. My salinity is rock solid week after week after week, month, year, year. It's always the same number pretty much. I mean, there's just so little variance. It's actually kind of incredible. But that's the benefit. Bigger water volume, things are a little bit more stable, but man, does it cost a lot to fix, something when it's wrong. So that's where I'm like, man, I wish I had a small tank. Those thoughts come into mind. J&A says, I had trouble with red cyanobacteria for ages, and I bought Ultralife Red Slime Remover, and no more cyano. Cleaned it up in less than 24 hours. I hope you're right. You say it cleaned up in less than 24 hours, which sounds miraculous and unusual. And you realize, I just want to throw this out there. If you just did it yesterday and today your tank looks great, because you didn't say when you did this, you might see it again tonight. And because it is a it's reacting to photosynthesis, and it appears during the daylight and then, during the lighting period, and then it fades away and goes completely away at night. And you could look at your tank with a flashlight and you don't see any trace of cyanobacteria. And you're like, wow. And then the next day it's all back. You're like, how is that possible? So I'm surprised to hear you solved it in a day. And I hope you're right. And maybe you did this a while back, and you did. And I don't know how you did it in a day. That's pretty miraculous. Almost every product I know that removes cyanobacteria takes about 3 days, maybe 5. But that's great. Thanks for sharing your story with us. Adam Moore says, my tank recently came back with very low bromine, no iron, no manganese. What products do you use to supplement trace elements? Well, I mean, there are products literally called trace elements that you can put in your tank, but we really can't test for them. And the only way you can, and the only way you know these numbers that you're talking about, are more likely from an ICP test. So depending on the brand of ICP test service you've chosen, they may even recommend which ones of their A, B, C, D you're supposed to use. Like if it was the Triton method, they would say you're going to need this much of each of these elements and stop using such and such. That could be the case. But other than that, I can't say, well, you're going to have to go buy this and that and the other. I'm like, where do you buy bromine? I don't know. So that would be one of those things where you may have to actually talk with the people that that you had the testing done with and see what they recommend. Neil says, I've been trying to get a Vertex Cerebra that a buddy gave me. Oh, trying to get it set up. Do you know of any support? That would be helpful. No, there is no support. That's the problem. The thing was basically a promised product for the hobby probably 10 years ago. And it was showcased at MACNA. It was really exciting. We're all looking forward to it. And then it just never came to market. And every year they'd have their booth and they'd show the Cerebra and you saw the latest version. And then the next year there was a really cool energy bar. And then the next year their control board changed and it was something else. And we're just like, so are you ever going to sell this? You're just going to keep teasing us with it. And I don't know what the exact problem was, but I'm assuming it was software issues or even programmers. And it never got resolved. And then eventually at one point, I think they tried to raise some capital and they offered everyone a Cerebra for a really low price to bring in some cash. And so a lot of people pre-bought it before it came out. It's sort of like a Kickstarter. And then, waited a long time. I mean, like 2 years and didn't have anything to show for it. And they were getting slow answers from the company. And then in the end, they just said, the customers were fed up and said want their money back, which you could understand. Even fish stores that were selling it to their clients had to refund their customers, and then the store had to get the money back from Vertex. So it was kind of not a fiasco. It just didn't work. It didn't work out. So I've got a friend who bought a whole bunch of them, thinking he's cornering the market on it, and that he would be able to get all of them. And he bought like 20 of them. And he was hoping that someone out there would program them and make them really amazing, and then he'd get them out to a bunch of friends. But man, I think that thing is like, it's kind of like going the way of the mainstream. It was neat, but there's no one working on it at this point that I'm aware of. And so it'd have to come down to someone getting creative, someone that is good at coding, that wants to try and breathe some life into it. Thanks, Kat. I appreciate that. She said she liked my shirt. Michael says, I've heard some stories regarding metals being found in dry sand. Is this safe to trust in live sand since we just poured straight in? Live sand shouldn't have any kind of metals in it at all. It's supposed to be completely ready to go for the aquarium and safe to use. I've never heard of anyone saying I use live sand and suddenly I have a problem. So yeah, no, I don't think you have to worry. Dry sand, if it's made for the aquarium trade, usually you don't have to worry about that. But if you're just trying to buy sand from like a quarry or from a pond supplier or even a Home Depot Lowe's scenario, you have no idea what's in that sand. That sand is not made for aquariums. It says right on the packaging, don't use it in an aquarium, and it probably very well does have metals. I had a friend who had a 55-gallon aquarium years ago, and he was determined to use play sand from Home Depot because it cost nothing. It was like $5 for like 80 pounds. And he put that in the tank, and that tank just did terribly. It was so bad. And I kept saying, man, I don't know. I think it's that sand you bought. And then one day he basically grabbed a trash can and a siphon hose and he siphoned out every grain of sand out of the tank. And whatever survived started doing better, because that stuff was gone. So, it's really ideal to use a sand that's been packaged for our hobby rather than trying to find a workaround. Dustin says, I have fish with ick, again, but they seem to be doing fine. It seems like it always gets in the tank no matter what I do. I have a 75 gallon. I'm upgrading to a 300 gallon. Should I just start over? Yeah. Since you're upgrading to a 300 gallon, it would be really nice to start off that tank with ick-free fish. So the fish in the... Okay, so what you could do... It won't be easy. But what you possibly could do is remove everything from the tank but the fish, in the 75 gallon, and set that thing to hyposalinity, which is 1.009, and keep that tank like that for at least 3 weeks. And that way, any ick that's present on those fish will fall off. The other choice is just remove the fish from the tank, put them in a hospital tank, and run hyposalinity to remove the ick. And then once they're ick-free and they're clean, then you gradually, over the next 2 weeks, bring salinity all the way back up to where it belongs. You have to do it very, very slowly. That's why it takes 2 weeks to bring it back up after you're done with a 3-week wait period. And then you can put those fish in your new 300 gallon. And any new fish you get, you quarantine and you make sure they don't have ick, so you don't so you don't pollute your new tank with the possible plague. So it's really important that it's going to be a lot of work. It's quite the ordeal. And but it is beatable. But if you just were to transfer things over, you're just going to transfer the problems over. So there is that. Alex says, is RoaPhos just a trade name for GFO? Yeah, RoaPhos is a brand of GFO that is made in Germany. And it's pretty expensive stuff. I had a big fat jar of it, and it was $80. And I think I ended up giving it to someone that loved GFO. I was like, here you go. Oh, can I put GFO and carbon in the same reactor or a canister filter? No, I mean, yes, but no. So carbon's only good for a few days. I know people think it lasts longer, but it doesn't. And GFO lasts for months. So if you have them in the same thing, like the same reactor, one is wiped out and the other one has so long to go, you're having to break it apart. And like if you were to use RO canisters, like BRS likes to sell, and you had carbon and then you had GFO, or you had GFO first and then carbon, whichever one you want to go with, you're going to keep changing the carbon one frequently while the GFO keeps going for a long time. And same thing with the canister filter. If you had compartments, like Cobalt makes a canister filter with these 4 trays inside, you could have one tray with floss, the next tray with carbon, the next tray with GFO, but the problem is you can't see the GFO to know if it's moving or not, and you don't have a way to control the flow going through the reactor very much, other than maybe some kind of a ball valve like this to lock in the flow rate, and then your flow going through the canister filter would have to be kind of slow. Of course, if you put GFO first and then you had a whole bunch of batting, that should trap a lot of the fines. But again, you're running water through it so quickly, it may not be efficient. I don't know. I don't think the answer is to do what you're asking. Kind of don't like the sound of it. But I do know some people would try to take a reactor like this one, and they'd have the sponge, and they put GFO, and they put the sponge, and they put carbon, they put the sponge, they put Purigen, and I'm just like, what? No. And the reason being is because as these different things use up, you have to pour out part of it, but not all of it, because some of it's still good. So it's much better to have individual reactors. And if you want, what you can do is you can have a single power head, like a MaxiJet 1200, that then feeds multiple reactors, and each one has a valve on them, and that way you can disconnect one reactor and clean it out and keep the pump running. Because you can just close the valve, you just take your valve, close the line, and now that line is shut off, the other 2 are still running, and then you can go clean out the reactor, replace the media, reinstall it, open the valve to what it was normally at, and all 3 in business, but you only have one power head in your sump, instead of having a pump with a reactor, 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 a pump with a skimmer, a pump with returning the water up to the tank. It's a lot of gear. It's a lot of pumps to plug in. It's a lot of plugs. All right. Ben says, I believe that I might have metals in my tank from a bad batch of water. Would adding something to the tank like marine conditioner remove any harmful metals? I'm running a polypad. No, the bad batch of water is unfortunate. The first thing you can do is carbon, and that will help absorb anything in the water that's there. Also, there's a thing called polyfilter, TM for trademark. That's an actual brand name of something. And you can put that somewhere in your tank and have water flow over it or through it or drip, pour over the top of it. And based on what color that thing turns, you'll know what's in the water. If it's green, it's this. If it's brown, it's this. If it's orange, it's this. Really neat. And it's a really good way to help capture what got in the tank, but it's not guaranteed. Obviously, the most effective method is going to be just massive water changes to change as much water as possible to get out what you think is in there. What trace metals do you think got in? What's happening with the tank and the livestock? Because, you said you think this happened, but we don't know what's going on. In the meantime, you want to make sure that you are not having anything involving brass fittings or copper fittings anywhere after the RODI system. So if, like, let's say you had an RODI and it was pumping into a barrel, and then let's say you had a brass fitting on the pump that circulates. That brass fitting is going to be putting copper into the water. So you want to make sure you don't use that on any kind of tubing. Even like, there was a guy I went to see many years ago. He asked me for some advice for this aquarium, and I showed up. And I looked at his big, huge vat of salt water. He had a huge, long hose, and he had a brass cutoff on the end. And I said, how long have you had that? And he goes, oh, since the beginning. And I said, well, the first thing you do is get rid of that and get all plastic. I keep showing you guys this thing. I mean, this is an all plastic fitting, and there's no metal, nothing to worry about. And plastic fittings are perfectly fine for an on-off on a hose, like if you're doing water changes. And when I told him that, and then I fixed a problem he had. His tank had micro bubbles that wouldn't stop, and I dug around in there, and I said, well, this right here has a strainer that's really, really clogged. And it was really hard to get out. I had to cut some pipe, but I removed that bad strainer, and I cleaned it, and anyway, I got it going, and he was so happy. The bubbles were gone, and I got rid of the brass fitting, and he said, that was worth your trip right there. And I'd only been there an hour and a half. I was there for days, but I mean, in the first hour, he was like, you've already solved 2 major issues. And, he says, I've had fish store owners here. I've had so many people look at this tank. No one could give me the advice, and then you found this. And I don't know, I stumbled on it. I traced the problem back. So with your situation, you think there's metal in your tank, you think something's happening. I'd like to know more of why you think that. Or just rather than worry about what happened, prevent it from happening again. So focus on that never happens again, that your water's always nice and clean and safe and doesn't have metals in it, and change a whole bunch of water to get the tank back to where it needs to be. Oh, that's a good one. Kevin says he's been taking the time to organize wires and stuff. Yeah, cable management is a great thing. Speaking of which, I wanted to show you guys something. I put this on Instagram yesterday, and I posted a picture. And I asked people, I just said, here's a teaser. I'll tell you about it tomorrow. So, of course, one person knew instantly what it was. But then they played along, and they said it's to make tacos. But this is the actual final product. Well, I mean, this is the product all built. And I made this for a customer probably a year and a half ago. And he finally posted pictures of it like a month ago. And this is what it looks like when it's all done. Ta-da! So what this is it is a power brick holder for your different appliances. You might have a light fixture that uses a black power brick. You could have a Vortec pump that uses a power brick. There's so many different devices out there. Even the XHOs from Reef Bright has a power brick. And so you can actually screw this into your stand. There's a couple of holes at the top, and you can set each power brick on there. And then I've put a notch at the top. I don't know if you can see that, but there are notches on every single shelf. And that's designed for a piece of Velcro to go around to hug it into place so it can't fall off. And so I made a couple of these last night. And one's going under my tank, just I needed one. And then one will go in the shop, and I'm going to start putting up for sale. The Velcro I wanted to tell you about, because a lot of us know what Velcro is. And I meant to bring it over here, but it's in the other room, and I'm not going to abandon you here while I'm on camera. But this Velcro, my friend Mike told me about it, and I'd never heard of it. It's, I mean, I'd never known where to buy it. It's a single roll, and it Velcros to itself. So usually Velcro's two halves, and a lot of times it's sold as separate strips, and you peel off the backing and peel off the backing, and you stick them to the two things, and then you press them together, and it holds something in place in theory. Well, this stuff, it's soft on one side and it's coarse on the other side, and you just cut a strip and you wrap it and then press it on itself. And that's awesome. And so I bought a roll of that specifically for this process. And that way when you put the power bricks in there and you set them in there, you put the Velcro around it and hold it, and it keeps them in place. And I just think that's just super convenient, because you can always remove it to take out the power brick if you needed to, or rearrange things, and then reconnect the Velcro on there. So I thought that I wanted to show you guys this one here. I thought you might find interesting. I don't even know what price I'll put on there. It might be $45 or so. I don't know. But I figured, during this time period, I should focus on making little things so people that need things, can get something. And since I mentioned that, I should put this on the screen. So I do appreciate when you buy things from the shop. This is how I make a living. And I've been very lucky during this time when so many people lost their jobs. My work has not stopped. And it's because of people like you that chose to buy something. And just so you know, if you buy anything from my website and it's small, it's something adorable like this, and you're like, I need this, my website will say, oh yeah, shipping's $18 with FedEx. If I can ship it for $6, I will. So, I just refund the difference. And I've been doing refunds for months now, because that is how the website is set up. And I'm not trying to take advantage of you on shipping. FedEx charges whatever they charge, and their rates are actually going up, is what I've been told. And I'm kind of seeing that. I've noticed it's going higher. So, when people buy something really big and it says, well, shipping is $42, but then when I actually do it and it's $30, I send them back $12. Because I'm not trying to take advantage of you or make you think I'm trying to add extra into the shipping. No, actually, I take a loss on shipping when you think about it. But that's just what it is. So I just want you to know, anytime I can ship something to you guys, if I can find a lesser rate, I will refund the difference. And I do that every time a package goes out. So thank you very much for your support, guys. Now, I want to talk about this real quick. It's very small. This is a hose clamp, and it goes around the hose and it snaps together and holds on tight. I don't have this in my shop. I actually was just wondering recently why I've never chosen to sell these. But people like Marine Depot, BRS, Premium Aquatics, they'd all have these in stock. You probably won't find this at Home Depot or Lowe's, but these are made of plastic and they last a super long time, and they come in different diameters. And I highly recommend them for anything you're running tubing on, so that the hose can't pop off. Because a lot of times people use the stainless steel clamps like you'd use on the water hose of your engine of your car. And that's fine in a car, it's not fine in a saltwater tank. And even though it's called stainless steel, it actually will rust. And if the steel doesn't rust, the screw that tightens the strip together, that can rust. And we don't want rust in our tank. I know we just had a whole conversation about rust when it comes to GFO, but we're talking about screws on power heads, we're talking about clamps on hoses. Anything you can eliminate and replace with plastic, like this hose clamp right here, would be really wise to get. And you might even find these on Amazon. And they come in black, they come in white. I don't know if they're in other colors too, but very convenient. And when you clip them together, like I said, they latch. And then when you need to separate them, you just twist to pull them apart, and it's reusable. And if you can't twist it for some reason, it's clamped on there really tightly, you can take needle nose pliers and you can just kind of and use the wrenches to pop it apart, clean the tubing you're working with, put it back on the pump, re-clip it with the clamp. And these things are really cheap. You probably get a package of them for a few bucks. So I would recommend that to you if you have any metal clamps down in your sump or hanging above your sump that are rusting from the humid air above your sump. And then that rust to just be dripping down into your sump and getting into your water and affecting your tank in a bad way. So it'd be really good to have plastic hose clamps anywhere you can find them. All right. Malawi says, greetings from the tiny island of Malta. Is ChemiPure Blue a good alternative to GFO? Doing water changes 10% a week or 10% spread out over a week. Okay, so 2 questions there. ChemiPure Blue does a lot of different things. It does help to some degree, and for a smaller tank it might work out great because you can just put it in the back of the all-in-one area and you just swap it out probably monthly. And it has some carbon in it and it has some bacteria in there to consume some waste. And it's got some enzymes and it's got some other stuff that I don't know. And all these things are supposed to help make your water more, well, that's why they call it pure. So that would be a possibility, and it definitely, I guess in a way, yes, is an alternative to GFO. But a lot of people tend to have a GFO reactor specifically and rely on that. Maybe because the bioload is heavier than what a bag of ChemiPure Blue could do. Now, obviously, you can use more and more of the stuff, but it just gets more and more expensive. And GFO is one thing only. ChemiPure Blue is like a bundle of things. So it's kind of like an all-in-one treatment versus a specific, I need to solve this problem. And then the other part about water changes. The general rule always was, and I still tout it to this day, of changing 25% of your water once a month. And if you do that, your tank will do quite well. Now, others have chosen to do water changes weekly, or they even want to do automatic ones that they do daily. Like, for example, I think Devin said he's changing like 2 gallons a day on his new aquarium, and he's got it set up with Versa pumps, and it's trickling water out and trickling water in every single day, and he never has to do a water change ever again. He just has to make sure he has salt water available and that everything is running correctly, so that way salinity doesn't get affected. But if you do 10% a week, mathematically, and I know it's not precise, but roughly you're changing 40% of your water a month. And that's a lot of water change. You don't have to do that. I think freshwater people have to do more water changes than saltwater people do. And my tank hasn't had but a few water changes in the last year and a half. Dave says, I'm starting a new upgrade build. How do I go about reusing equipment currently in use, such as media reactors or calcium reactors? I don't want to transfer pests to the new build. Your reactors shouldn't have pests in them anyway. So you just clean them just like you always clean them. You take them to the sink, you disassemble, you scrub everything down, you take toothbrush to it, you have tube cleaners like pipe brushes, you might have a toilet brush that you run down the main reactor tube, and you can use vinegar and water, you can use just water, you can use citric acid, you can really clean everything to where it's like new, dry it all off, put it all back together again, install it on the new tank. You won't get pests from that. The media in your calcium reactor potentially might have something in there. I don't know what. I've never found any animals of any kind, not even pods, inside my calcium reactor. And I would attribute that to the fact that the pH is so low in that reactor that it doesn't sustain life. All it does is melt media. So you shouldn't have anything in there. Your protein skimmer might have some weird stuff in it. It could have starfish in there. It could have worms in there. It could have Gfo sponges in there, which are the pineapple sponges. You might see those. Some kind of tube worms might be on there. And, you know, again, I do a full cleaning of my protein skimmer. It gets an acid bath overnight. And then the next day I completely take it apart, clean it all, put it together, and it looks brand spanking new. And I put it in my sump. And if you did the same thing, you clean it completely and you put it in your brand new system, nothing transfers from that either. And then, of course, your pumps, they might have stuff on them or in them, so you clean those really well and you move them. But yeah, you're not going to like move over ick or peanut worms or I'm trying to think, like Aptasia, for example. Aptasia would probably be living in your overflow box. You might have some inside the plumbing of the old tank, but odds are you have new plumbing on the new tank, so that's not anything to worry about either. That's pretty much it. I mean, I love to clean things. I mean, it's not an OCD thing. I just like them clean and looking new. I like things to last. And so I understand where you're coming from, and I think that if you just clean everything properly and just put it on the new tank, you'll be good to go. Steve says that he's lucky enough to still keep working so he can use his money as he wishes. And he says he's wanting to get a DC protein skimmer for a 120-gallon tank. Any suggestions? A DC pump. There's a few brands on the market. A lot of people like the Reef Octo. that has the controllable pump on it for, I guess, dialing. I mean, I don't know. The reason I laugh is because why would I control my skimmer down? There's only a very rare occasion where you need to dial the flow down on your protein skimmer. The rest of the time, I want that thing running 100%. I would say the only time you want it down is after you treated the tank with ChemiClean and your skimmer keeps overflowing. So maybe by dialing it all the way down, you can kind of control it briefly. But at the same time, you have to export the stuff from the water. So letting the skimmer overflow into a bucket nearby is actually quite normal. So I don't know. I don't see the point. Now, the Nios skimmer that I'm running on both my tanks, I guess those are AC pumps. They don't have a power brick. It's just a pump with a cord with a plug. And they just keep running. I don't even have a matter of fact, I was thinking recently, I really should get a backup pump in case one of those things fails. But I don't know. I mean, Reef Octo, like I said, I like the look of the skimmer. I haven't heard one in person, you know, in a quiet environment to see what it sounds like. I don't know. I think you should ask everyone else except me. Sorry. Let's see. Saif is asking pretty much the same question. I'm setting up a 130-gallon tank. What size or what suggestion for a skimmer would you recommend? I really like my Nios skimmer, so that would be mine. I do know people have used the Bubble Magnus curve and seemed happy with it. I think there's and this is going to sound a little punny, I think there's a learning curve with that skimmer, and you may find some blogs or some forum posts telling you how to use it or what you have to do to make it run properly. So you might want to do a little research on people that already own that skimmer and see what their experience has been thus far or what they had to do to make it work. If you found that in your area and you want to use it, I've not heard horror stories, so that's good right there. But something in the back of my head is telling me that I heard something where people had to do something to make it run smoothly, but I don't recall what it was because I don't have one. Nathan says exactly what I was referencing before. He says, my wife and I are both introverts. We have been training for this, staying at home our whole lives. It's true. There's some of us, and I kind of feel like I'm in that. I really am a homebody. I love to be at home and watch a movie at home because I don't know about you guys, but when I go to the movie theater, I buy the movie ticket, I buy the popcorn, I buy the Coke, I buy the Milk Duds. And I'm in for about $40, $45. But that doesn't happen at home. Plus, during the movie theater, I need to pee, but they won't stop the movie for me. So I have to miss part of it. And I hate that. And I try to not have that problem, but I'm drinking the giant Coke. So, I mean, it's self-defeating. Right? So at home, I can hit play, I can hit pause, I can hit play, I can hit pause. You know, I can make a bag of popcorn for nothing. I can, refill my drink. So I don't know where I was going with that. Great question. Tank Tools says, when cutting Gorgonians, primarily the skinnier ones, do you trim back a little of the tissue at the bottom to aid in regluing the new piece, or just stick it somewhere and hope it stays stuck? Okay, I'm so glad you asked that question because I learned this in a frag workshop years ago, and I watched the guy do it, and it was really interesting. So he had, like you said, a very skinny Gorgonian, not some beefy coral, and he cut it with I think he had like a scalpel or an X-Acto knife to cut it from the colony, and now he had the twig. And then he took the X-Acto knife and he cut away some of the tissue and pulled it off to where basically what was extending out was the core. And the core was more like stick or toothpick. It was something semi-rigid. And then he had a frag plug with a tiny hole in the middle. I think it was pre-drilled before the frag demo. And he would just put a drop of glue in the hole and then push the toothpick part of the Gorgonian in there and let it sit for a minute, and then the living coral was above the plug. And I thought, how brilliant is that? I mean, because, a lot of us want to just glue the thing in place or there are other methods like a rubber band or a zip tie. And by gluing it in place to the core part, it's going to hold on really well, because it takes a long time for these corals to grow tissue. And if you put glue on the tissue and just stick it on a rock, the tissue inside is going to die off, and it could even rot away, and it may come off the rock anyway. So that method of trimming off a little bit, just to give yourself like a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, a 1/4 inch is probably more than enough. Just a little bit of a nub that you can put into a tiny hole. And if your frag plug doesn't have a hole, you can drill a small hole with a masonry bit. Or if you have a rock you're going to use, you can drill a small hole with a masonry bit. And you can put the glue in there, and you can put the Gorgonian in, and you can just make sure it's holding, and then set it in your tank somewhere nice. So thanks for asking that question. That was a good one. Ian says that he is just getting over a heart attack. This is not the time to get sick and need a hospital. So please, you guys do everything you can to be safe. Okay, great. Andrea just let me know that the GFO that I gave away is given away. I need to see if the DVD and the Blu-ray were given away. Let me check. All right. Trying to be on top of things for you guys. Jamie, I kind of talked about this, and I'm sure he wrote this. I'm always 30 minutes behind on the chat. But he was saying, why is GFO safe to use in our aquariums, and yet we don't want anything rusting in our tanks that can cause problems? And, that's a valid question. And odds are someone has written a great article on explaining the difference between the two. My gut is telling me, because I don't know the answer, my gut is telling me that possibly the difference is there's no electricity involved in GFO. GFO is in a reactor by itself, tumbling quietly through water. And we are dictating how much water goes into it and how much water comes out of it. Where, like, if a frag rack magnet splits open and rusts, there's the component the magnet is made of. Same with the magnet inside a protein skimmer pump or a return pump. Or, these are all magnets that we do see elements of rust, but the magnet itself is made of something different. It's not just iron. And and then again, there's the electricity component I was mentioning that I might be wrong about, but I feel like power and the split open magnet and the rust all causes chaos in our tanks. There's obviously no electrical situation going on with a frag rack or with a cleaning magnet, but I think it's just a different type of metal is why we can use one, but we fear the other. I think that's the answer. I had to think my way through that one. I feel like I'm on that, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Let me think through my answer, and then I come up with my final answer. Weberton, thank you so much for tuning in. You're supposed to say, Brazil! Let's see. All right, let me scroll way down. I feel like I'm so far behind. That I answered. A lot of people wanted the GFO. Look at all these names. Wow. Okay, so the DVD has been claimed and the GFO has been claimed. So those are done. The Blu-ray guy that won it last week hasn't shown up yet, so we're going to hold on to this for him. However, I have 2 more DVDs, so we're going to give these away now. So for the next, let's say, 15 minutes, I'm going to make it short instead of long. If you want the DVD, please put in there DVD as your comment so Andrea can pick a name from you guys. I want you to live in the US because I'm paying for the postage. So, and plus I don't think it'll play in your country, so it needs to be a US-based person. I am sorry, it just is what it is. It says on the back of this NTSC, and I believe in Europe it's PAL, and so this probably wouldn't even play correctly on your TV, so this has to be US winner. If you wanted to win this, it's Coral Sea Dreaming Awaken, and I have been giving these away because I want them off my shelf. And they've never been opened, they're brand new, and I'm just doing it. So we have 2 of these to give away. Andrea in 15 minutes, so from now, about 3:45, she'll draw 2 names. Please be on the chat so you can be contacted to send your mailing information to her. And that way I can get these mailed out this week. And I'll save the Blu-ray. So let me ask you guys this. Because of our health concerns globally, are you looking at every single thing that happens to you, being hyper aware to wonder if you're sick? I mean, like my nose has got a sniffle, my eyes are burning. I'm like, oh, do I have it? You know, I mean, just, it's a constant battle, right? Every day you wonder. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Anchor. See, I knew there was something I forgot on the GFO topic. All right, so when should you use GFO when you're setting up a new tank? You don't need it at the very beginning. You probably don't need it for the first 90 days, to be honest. The first, let's call it a month that you're cycling the tank, there's no livestock. There's nothing to process. Now, granted, the rock in the tank could have phosphates coming out of it, and so you're thinking, let me strip that out now. But you're trying to build a biological support system for the livestock you're going to be adding later. And if you strip out all the nutrients out of the water, then the bacteria can't thrive and the bugs can't grow. These bugs you need. You need the copepods, you need the amphipods, you need the mysids. And these are little tiny guys that come in with your rock, if you have any life on the rock. If you used all dry rock, really honestly, if you're going to be setting up a tank later this year and you already have the rock, or at least you have a plan you're going to set up a tank, get the rock now, get it in a barrel salt water with circulation, and just let it cook in the corner. Just get that thing going and let that rock basically cure. And you can even use that kit that I sell on my website now. It's a dry rock cycling kit. And you can get that going if you wanted. You could use Live Rock Enhanced to seed with the bacteria, but get the rock going there. Change the water in the trash can a few times. And that way when you're ready to actually put your tank together, you can take the rock out of the trash can and you can put it in your tank and start using it. But GFO you probably will not need for a few months. So I would hold off. I would not use it from the beginning. I would use it when it's time because you need it. Now, I did mention before I had something else I want to talk about pertaining to this topic, but it's going a different direction because we said, let's talk about GFO. I'm going to be the anti-GFO guy that I always have been, and that's okay. I mean, like I said, this is another choice you have, and it's funny, it's got the same name, Phosban, but this is Phosban L. This is made by Two Little Fishies. This is a great product for a customer that has a really big tank. So I have this in my shop, and this is super concentrated liquid lanthanum chloride, and you have to follow the instructions very carefully. And you're gonna, like on my size tank, I would take 20 milliliters of this bottle, and this is a 500 milliliter bottle. So I take 20, and I mix it with 40 milliliters of RO water, RODI water, and now I have 60 milliliters, and that I would trickle into my tank very, very slowly to knock out the phosphates overnight. This is one way of going that is more manual. You have to mix it up properly. You can't just pour it right out of the bottle. You can't dose it right out of the bottle, and you got to use it very, very slowly. And so this is available, and it is something that's very cost effective, but it's more hands-on. You have to do more work with it. And then I mentioned to you guys before about Phosphate Rx, which is so easy. It's just an eyedropper bottle, and you just take off the cap, and you just drip, 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 and you count the drops. And for me, that is what I love to do. And I don't care if I have to use 3 of these bottles a year or 6 of these bottles a year. It makes no difference to me. It is the simplest way to control phosphate in my tank, and it's what I've been recommending to people for over a decade. When this came out, and I was like, are you kidding me? This is so much easier than GFO. I said, why doesn't everyone use this? And they're like, And I'm just like, okay, but I've been talking about it and I highly recommend it and I love it. But those of you with small tanks, the little nanos that don't have good filtration, you know, where you're limited on space, it's a little more challenging. And so I've kind of got an idea in the back of my head about making some kind of an apparatus you can set on top of your tank for the night that you could install some kind of a filter sock. And these things are pretty big. This is probably 16 inches or so. So I have this kind of a nifty idea that might work. And you would dose the Phosphate Rx into the tank. You'd have a power head to push water into the sock and then it'd trickle back down in the tank. And this is a this is a 10 micron sock. See, 10 microns. And it feels funny. It feels different than a regular filter sock. This just arrived a few days ago. And this is a 5 micron sock. It's actually the same micron as the sediment filter on your RODI system. And it feels even smoother inside. And also, something you probably know this already, but I'm just going to say it because some people don't know. When you're buying socks, they come in 2 sizes typically, unless it's proprietary. So this is a 4-inch sock. That means this ring is for a 4-inch sock holder. The length of the sock is never mentioned in the size. So when you're looking for a sock for your tank, it's either going to be 4 inches or it's going to be 7 inches. And I had someone order this and they thought they were getting a sock that was 7 inches long. And that's not how they sell them. We just don't care. We don't care how long they are. You can just fold over the bottom or you can get a sewing machine and you can sew the bottom. Take a break from all those masks you're making and fix your filter sock to the correct length for your tank. But these are 7-inch socks. These are 4-inch socks. I have them in multiple sizes on my website. I've got the 200 micron, I've got the 10 micron, and now I just got in some 5 microns. I'm going to try it out first before I sell it, but I ordered 10 anyway because I had a feeling I'll like it, and someone else will say, you know, I'm really glad you got those in. I've always wanted that. So I ordered that. So when you're using lanthanum, whether you're using Phosban L or you're using Phosphate Rx or you're mixing C-Clear from the pool store, it's best to use one of these filter socks to trap the flocculant from your system as quickly as possible. And the other thing to be aware of, and which you don't have to worry about with Gfo you just hook it up and do your thing. But for those of you that have yellow tangs inside your aquarium, some are susceptible and don't do well with lanthanum. And the weird part is I've got 2 yellow tangs swimming around in my tank that have been through it many, many, many times over the last 5-6 years I've owned them, and they've never skipped a beat. I don't know why some people with yellow tangs have problems, but the workaround or the cure is to buffer up your alkalinity 20 minutes before you dose the lanthanum. And if you do that, your yellow tangs should not be affected, is what I'm told. But if you're worried or you're thinking, no, I don't want to take the chance, then that's why you have the option to use Gfo. Mark C., thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. Oh no, Mr. Reef Buster is going to the ER, says having a real hard time breathing. One of the biggest symptoms or concerns of the symptoms I've heard is you can't catch your breath. So it's kind of that feeling of drowning. And fortunately, that hasn't happened to me. Let's see. All right. Hey, a lot of you guys are doing a great job today with your questions. They're putting @Mila's Reef at the beginning. Thank you so much. That helps me find your questions in the chatter of the live chat. How are we doing on time? We got about 9 more minutes until Andrea picks a winner for those 2 DVDs. Derby City Reefer says, what's considered good for a phosphate level? Okay, so the ideal is 0.03. But anything under 0.1 is a great target area. My tank tends to be higher. And my friend Rich in California, he's got this gorgeous tank with all kinds of life, and his phosphates are always like 1.0, or somewhere around that. They're really high. And yet his reef is looking really pretty and continues to grow, and he has to keep pulling things out because it's so full. So that's what I was saying before. I don't really fear phosphates. I've never really been worried about them. I just don't have an issue with them. If I just had like hair algae problems and I had bubble algae problems that were just taking over the tank, I guess I'd care a lot more about phosphate. But since I don't see those problems in my tanks, I just don't really sweat it. Alex says, is Nopox better than Phosphate Rx? Oh, sorry. Got it. There we go. I just ran out of Phosphate Rx when I was thinking about switching. Nopox is designed to remove nitrate and phosphate. So in theory, yeah, I guess it would be better. But Phosphate Rx is going to deal with the one thing only, not both. So you have your choices on what you want to use. And then JS says he uses the RX to knock it down, and then uses GFO to maintain the low level. And that's another approach that you can take. Looking for the next question. Tim Mattel says, who bribed Mark to talk about GFO? No, it was I was thinking, what can I talk about today? And I was like, what have I not talked about? And I thought, well, I never talk about GFO. So let's talk about it, because I have so much experience with it. I only have 9 months of real hands-on, getting my hands dirty with it, and I hated it. Oh my God, it was awful. So those of you guys that do it, I'm always like, wow, okay. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Derby City Reefer said, in other news, I just added my 50th frag today. After 7 months of research and building my own system, I finally have a reef tank. Well, congratulations. I have never heard anyone ever count how many frags they have in their, or corals they've added to their tank to actually say, this was number 50. So I think that's pretty cool. Thanks so much for telling us that. And I hope your tank does well. Bradley says, what's some good small pumps that you can use to feed the reactor? I currently have a MaxiJet feeding mine, but it's a little bulky for the chamber. You know, there's a little tiny one by Sicce, S-I-C-C-E, and I think it's like 15 bucks. It's a little tiny, adorable guy, and I'm sure they have larger ones. And you might go that route. You might find one of those fits nicely. There was another brand that made little tiny pumps that, oh yeah, Rio. And probably Chinese made, and Sicce is made in Italy. The Rio pumps, they had little tiny ones too, a little nugget, like the size of an ice cube, really small. So that's a chance you could use that maybe. It shouldn't be too hard to find that. Crisis Film says, any tips on keeping an anemone tank happy? Well, keep your arm out of it. Make sure that the pumps are protected from the anemones so they don't get sucked in and chewed up and destroyed. Clean the glass regularly. Make sure you maintain reef parameters. Have good lighting, but don't run them too long a day. That's about it. Adam says, I really can't tell if I have cyano or diatoms. Is there any tips on IDing them? Well, really the best way to actually know what you have is to use a microscope. And you can take a sample of what you've got, and you put it under the microscope, and you look at it, and you can see the cell structure. And then you can just Google the cell structure of these different items and do a comparison of pictures. And I've been kind of playing with the idea of possibly getting a microscope and getting my hands on some of these things like dinoflagellates and diatoms and cyano, and just, taking some pictures and sticking them on the ID page. And that way you could see a picture of, and we could do all kinds of stuff. We could do different types of algae. This is what hair algae looks like under the microscope. This is what Caulerpa looks like under the microscope. This is what Chetomorpha looks like under the microscope. And you could actually see and compare something you have and really identify things super accurately, because sometimes it does feel like guesswork. Now, for now, you don't have a microscope. There are, you'd have to make a decision what you want to do about that, if you want to order one from Amazon or not. But if you're using white light in your tank, you should be able to see the difference. Cyano tends to be a color. Red, green, blue, These are some common colors, kind of a darker red, almost brown. Diatoms are always a dusty brown, so they don't do a different color. It could be you have a little bit of both at the same time. That could happen too, especially with a younger tank. But the microscope is really your best bet. Trevor says, so curing dry used rock is mostly about getting the dead organics to decompose out. Yes, absolutely. And it came from a term that someone, I don't remember who it was, that said it way back in the early 2000s, where they talked about cooking live rock, and all of us did it, but we just, we didn't cook it. It was just, I don't know why they came up with that term, but it stuck. And you just take all your live rock and you put it in a barrel in total darkness. And you can skim that water if you want. You can change the water weekly if you want. But the idea is that everything that's on there will just die off in the darkness. And by exporting the water, you're actually rejuvenating the rock and making it like new again. So that is the idea with any kind of rock you get from someone, or whether you're buying dry rock that's just dry. I mean, like brand new Marco rock that's dry. Or you're using rock from an old aquarium that sat in a backyard forever. Getting it into circulation, it will help also because the rock itself, no matter what size it is, the epicenter is still wet, even though the whole rock looks dry. And inside there is all kinds of bacteria. And a lot of times once the water gets in and starts moving its way through the rock, it releases all kinds of hideous stuff that causes chaos in our aquariums if you don't cure it first. So that's why it's so good to, whenever you have rock that's left over, get into a barrel and just let it simmer in the background indefinitely, just forever. Just have it always running, occasionally change water. I like to put the lid of the trash can upside down so it's convex, and that way it just, as condensation happens, it drips right back in. You don't have to top off. If you just have an open barrel, you got to keep adding some water from time to time. And I had a whole bunch of rock for, I don't know, 7 years in a trash can that I would take out of and put a new rock in, and I was swapping them out. And I neglected the heck out of that trash can. The only thing I cared about was circulation. I had a big old mag pump in there. And from time to time, I would, look in there and I could see yellow sponge growing everywhere. And I never gave it any food. That barrel was open. I didn't have a lid on top of it. And so I'd have to dump in 3 or 4 or 5 gallons of RO water because it had evaporated, because I neglected it. But then later, when I was really ready to rock and roll, I put it in a trash can with the upside down lid and just let it sit there, and it did its thing. And then every week or two I changed the water, and then when it was time to set up my tank, I had a whole bunch of nice rock to use. I put it in. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't purple, but you know what? In a few months it started to get the color it needs to be, and I didn't have a lot of issues with the tank. Sky and Sea says he picked up a Echinaster starfish while diving, and can't seem to find a way to feed it. It could be, I mean, you took it out of its natural environment. It's in your artificial environment, which you're trying to mimic the ocean as much as possible. It could have even been just it's unhappy from the acclimation process. It didn't like being exposed to air in the first place, possibly, if that's what you did. And if, I understand it's not interested in going on the sand or the glass, but you could try different, you're trying different things right now. You're trying different foods. That starfish may even stand up a little bit to catch something like a fish swimming under it. It's a possibility. And that does sometimes happen. But sometimes it's just catching any kind of particulate food going through the tank. You might try something as simple as using Benereef, because that is a food that's super fine, and the starfish could absorb some of it from the water column while the tank is all cloudy for 45 minutes or so, and that would give it a chance to eat. But yeah, you're trying different things like nori, you're trying meaty foods. You could even try, I've seen starfish eat pellet food, but they have to put an arm down on the sand and grab the pellets. So you could try some of those different things. Good luck. I'd love to see a picture of it. If you're in Club Meals Reef, please post a picture. I'd like to see it, what you found. Reef King says, my Hippo Tang is eating my corals. He's mad. Yeah, Hippo Tangs do that. They're actually troublesome little fish. And they will move corals across the tank. They will chew on zoanthids. That's one of the reasons why Dory will not be going in my 400-gallon tank. Our seller says my acros have been starting to STN, which is slow tissue necrosis. The only changes are new lights and carbon dosing. The alkalinity is steady as a rock. Nitrates are 10 to 15. Phosphates around 0.15. Back off on the carbon dosing. And you didn't say what your alkalinity level was. Also keep in mind that when you're carbon dosing, your water will be a little more clear, so the entire tank gets more light than it did before. But it just depends how bad the STN is. If it's just really, really slow and it's just around the base, as long as everything above it is doing better, you know, I wouldn't sweat it. All the reefs we have in the ocean now, the bottom part of the reef is dead and all the living stuff's on top. It doesn't go life to the bottom. It doesn't go life to the rock necessarily, unless it was a piece that broke off and landed on the rock and just glued on and started growing when you happen to pass over it. But even the 20,000 gallon reef in Long Island that I shared with you guys years ago, he'd have corals really tall and they were beautiful and we're like, oh my God, that's fantastic. And then he'd go in there and he'd cut off all the tops and he would remove a big section of dead coral reef. Literally, that's what it is. It's dead coral that made a reef, and he removes it so he can lower the aquascape lower again and get the corals to grow out and still have a nice view into the tank. James says, what do you recommend for a phosphate parameter? I like to have it under 0.1. So like 0.05 would be nice, 0.03 is great, but if it's a little higher, it's okay. This is a vague question. So the biggest bang for your buck reef inhabitants, inverts included. It's really hard to answer that question. There is just so many choices available to us, and getting the best value for your dollar is what you're basically asking. Comes down to the price of the livestock. You know, it comes down to what things cost where you're shopping. And you might say, well, that thing's awesome. I really want it. And maybe they have it priced low because they want to move it. That would be the best bang for your buck. But if it's a, you know, there's been things I've seen in the store like, oh my God, that's gorgeous. How much is it? And they tell me, I'm like, okay, thanks. And I just walk away. So you have to choose what works best for you, what you like, what you appreciate, and what you can afford. But I don't know that I can give you a more specific answer to that one. Nick Rose says, I'm sure you've mentioned that you use aquavitro salinity for your salt. Does your alkalinity drop in the mixing container? I noticed that mine drops from 8 to 9 to mid-low 6 in one day. Wow, that's fast. I have noticed it goes down. And when it goes down, all I do is bring it back up by dosing soda ash mixed, you know, with a cup of water. And I just pour that into the salt water to buffer up the alkalinity back where it needs to be, and it's ready to go. Everything else in there is still good. And the water is pure because my container is sealed. So I have no fear of it. It's always in circulation. It's always moving. And so if I do need to buffer up, I do. And then, you know, I know it matches my tank and I can do my water change. But I think that happens with a lot of different brands of salt, honestly. It's so important when you're doing a water change that you double check the water you're going to put in your tank and check your salinity, check your temperature, and check your alkalinity / pH. If those numbers match your tank, that water is safe to change. B. Spieg says, I want a calcium reactor but don't have room under the stand. Are there any problems with putting it in the basement and running 10 to 15 feet of 1/4-inch tubing for the effluent up to the sump in the stand? Well, you're also going to have to take water from the sump down to the calcium reactor. So possibly that could, because it comes out so slowly. Well, you know what? I think, you might have to prove me wrong on this, but I think you could set that up with the Versa pump and you could have it peristaltic pump the water down into the calcium reactor and it'll travel right back up into the sump, up, you know, 1 floor up from the basement, and probably be just fine. The only thing of concern would be if that calcium reactor down in the basement leaked, it would change the water level in your sump because it's leaking into the basement unattended, ignored. And by the time you finally notice, you may have lost several gallons of water, and your top off has replaced water in your tank with RODI, which is now affecting salinity on the tank. So if you could put the calcium reactor, I mean, here's what I'm thinking. Calcium reactor is down in the basement in a tray of some kind of a bin. And then I would put a sensor in the bin to make a loud noise or notify you through the Apex controller that the sensor is wet. That tells you the reactor has leaked or something has let go, and you can immediately look into the problem and solve it. But if it's just down there and you don't go down to the basement very much, something bad could be happening for days before you noticed. So I would try to set up something. If you just get one of those weird, I think they call it leak frog. It's just a noisy thing that looks like a frog, and you set it in there, and when the bottom of the frog gets wet, he starts ribbiting. I found a thing at Harbor Freight that looked like a small, I don't know, like a small pager with a long wire and two little probes. And I used to put that down on the floor next to my washer dryer when I flooded my utility room. Every time I made water, I'd forget. And I put the probes right in the grout of the tile, and because that was the first spot where water always went. And that thing would wail like a smoke detector. I'd jump off the sofa and hit the ceiling and then run to turn off the water. And it was only a little bit, but it was still like, ah. And I mopped that room a lot. So I'm so glad everything in my house now is automated to where I have float valves and I never have a wet floor. But if you want to do this, yes, you can do it. And I just feel like you need to be notified if there's any kind of water coming out. And it may never happen, but if and when it does, it'd be great that you had something set up to let you know. Other than that, I think that the Versa pump would be fine for pushing the water down and up. Or maybe you could use gravity to go down and use the Versa to send it up with the pull method. But I think that it can just push it just fine because it's 1/4-inch tubing. Steven says, my 4 ACANs are angry and retracted over the last week. Salinity is 1.026, temperature is 79, nitrates are under 20, no ammonia, pH is 8.0. All the LPS, SPS, and ZOAs are doing great. So what gives? And the water change didn't help. Could be a fish is nibbling at those. I would look at that tank tonight. Make the whole room dark where the aquarium is and get away from the tank so you're far away and just watch your fish. And see if something is going over there nipping at your ACANs, because it could be very specifically to a fish that's doing this. Jess says, what kind of damage could anemones do to clownfish? Not much. Obviously, there are certain types of anemones that are great for clownfish, and then there's some that they don't naturally host clownfish at all. So like you have a long tentacle anemone, you would need a clownfish that can live in a long tentacle. And there's probably only like, I think there's only like 1 or 2 species. I'm a bubble tip anemone guy, but I think only 1 or 2 can actually handle an LTA. The clownfish typically will go up to an anemone it likes, like a sea bay or a bubble tip or a carpet, and they'll actually test or suck on the tentacles to build an immunity so they can swim through it and live in it and call it home. But like if you had rock anemones, flower anemones, tube anemones, these are things clownfish would never live in. They'll probably never go near it. And if they did, possibly they get stung, captured, and potentially even be eaten. So there is that. So I would definitely be looking up a compatibility chart of what you're looking at getting to see what works with what. Sky and Sea suggests if you're going to do a small water change, why not just let the skimmer do it by having it just overflow into a bucket and then replace that water? You could, I guess. Seems slow. Though when I had my 29-gallon years ago, I really didn't like. It's not even ironic. It's accurate. I didn't like water changes then, just like I don't like water changes now, and I hated doing them. And I remember when I would do my water change each month, I have to fill up a bucket of salt water. I needed more than a bucket. I had to do, it was 29 gallons, so I had to change like 7 gallons, and buckets were 5 gallons. And I took the the bucket of salt water, and I had to get it up off the floor and hoist it and pour it into the tank. The tank was up this high. So I had to lift this heavy bucket, which, what is that, 50 pounds? And pour that in the tank and not get it everywhere else. And even thinking about it now makes my back hurt. And I hated it. So one of the first things I did, one of the first things I bought online, because back then buying online was not normal. Everyone went to a store and bought things. I bought a pump and 10 foot of tubing from a fish store in California. And they were like one of the first online sellers. And I used that pump, I'd set it in the 5-gallon bucket, and I'd hold the hose, and I'd turn on the pump, and it would just fill the tank. And when I was done, I just put it away. And you could even use the pump to pump the water out of the tank and move it along a lot more quickly. So I've always chosen to go that route, rather than, like you're saying, use a skimmer and overdriving it. The skimmer would pull out watery skimmate, but it's going to come out so slowly. You know, it might seem like a lot because the cup is so adorable, but when you're trying to have it drain into a bucket, it could take an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours to actually get enough skimmate to fill that bucket up. Where you could pump it out of the tank in 5 minutes, and you could pump it back in the tank in 5 minutes, and you're done. So that's my answer. Reef King says, I was thinking about giving up today as my Hippo Tang killed my Lobo and all my candy canes. I think you should give up on the Hippo, which is what just another nanotank said as well. Just remove the troublesome fish that's causing chaos so you can enjoy the rest of the tank. And I see Marine Reef is on here. Glad you made it to the live stream. And Robert Lawrence says, I wet skim and use no pox, and the results have been great. It's awesome. All right. Trevor asks, in the cooking live rock video, the rock you're starting from some guy's tank, was it wet? Was it sitting dry for a few weeks? So what it was my friend AJ. And he was setting up a tank, and he had this rock that he'd bought from the fish store. And what it was, I believe, was dry rock. And that's what I said in the beginning of the video. I actually forgot and had to rewatch the video because it had been so long since I filmed that. But I think I told everyone, let's pretend this is live rock. Let's pretend this is used rock from my friend's tank. I think that's what I said. And so we just had to recreate the situation minus the actually physically having rock that came from an aquarium, because I just needed some rock for the video. And so I think he had some dry rock, and we just got it wet for the video, and I did my whole presentation. So, like I said, I didn't mislead or lie in that video. I said what was actually happening, and I actually forgot I'd said all those things. But if you do buy a used setup, like I have done in the past, I bought the 55-gallon used, I bought the 280-gallon used. I feel like I've maybe a third purchase where I've got rock from other people. I've always thrown it in the barrel and let it cook. Lamont, thank you for the super chat. And he asks, when I use Reefroids, I see cyano pop up. Why is that? I think that Reefroids has the right ingredients to create cyanobacteria in your tank. And that's just unfortunate. And it's not the only item. I mean, for example, Oyster Feast from Reef Nutrition does the same thing. I can put in just a little tiny bit of that stuff in my tank, and boom, I see cyanobacteria. It's unbelievable. And so I don't use Reefroids, and I don't use Oyster Feast, but I use all the other stuff. If you wanted an alternate from Reefroids, then I would use the Benereef, and I sell that on my website. And that one, you can use a lot of it, and you don't get the cyanobacteria from it. Aiden says, can you carbon dose with a refugium? I hear mixed things. Yes, you absolutely can. Carbon dosing is a way to control nitrate and phosphate in your tank, specifically nitrate. That's really the main thing of carbon dosing, was to get nitrates down. So if you're going to do that, your refugium can still do well. It really comes down to what's going on in the refugium before you even start. If you have a nice, healthy refugium and you're carbon dosing and you're fixing nitrates, you might see the refugium completely not even care. But if you're just starting and the refugium's just starting and you have this little ball of a plant in the corner and it just doesn't seem to be doing anything, it could just be there's just not enough mass to make a difference. I watched the BRS video about refugiums, and there was like the top, I don't know what they said, top 12, top 20 mistakes people make with refugiums. And the one thing I agreed with them specifically was when they said, put a bunch of plants in your refugium, because everyone gets like this cute ball from like Algae Barn, and they put it in there, and they have this big refugium, there's this little ball in the corner like, it's not doing anything. I was like, no, it probably won't. But if you could pull it apart a little bit, you know, increase some circulation and make it tumble, give it good light but not too much light, because I think that's one of the biggest problems people have. They try to run that light 24 hours a day. And that is negative. It doesn't work well. So you could add more of the macroalgae to kind of fill in the refugium, kind of like you're doing your front yard. You know, the lawn looks like crap, so you go and you get a bunch of sheets of grass that the sod, and you set it down on the yard everywhere where it's missing, and now everything is green equally. And I'm not saying max out your refugium with like 50 pounds of macroalgae, but give it more. I think that's a mistake that people do, is they just don't have enough in there in the first place. And I think they start the refugiums too soon. But that's a whole other topic. Let's stick with this one. Carbon dosing and refugiums does work together, and you should not lose your refugium because you're controlling nitrate. Hey, Martinez is here. I haven't seen him on here in a couple of weeks. Marine Reef says, what do you dose your tank with? And he says, I'm new, I'm just started following you. Thanks for your message last week on my new YouTube channel. Yeah, well, I dose alkaline calcium because it's calcium reactor. I dose AcroPower because I had some. I dose magnesium because my tank needs it. And then I dose Phosphate Rx as needed to control phosphate. And I think that's everything I actually physically dose in the tank. Oh, and of course I use Prodibio. Prodibio is a bacteria. There's two types of bacteria. There's a food, there's a vitamin, there's strontium, and there's iodine. And there's 6 different vials. And I put that in every 15 days. And I've been doing that since 2011. So those are what I use in my tank. And then RODI for top off. Let's see. How are we doing on time? Coming up on 2 hours. By the way, I mentioned to you guys earlier to find the video or the channel, Some Good News. Make sure you do it. And I am seeing so many people streaming to Facebook, to Instagram. I don't know if they stream to Twitter or not. And I actually don't know how anyone can be bored. There's just so many different people you can turn to and watch. You know, your favorite actors, they're all available online these days. There's a music concert happening tonight that I've set my DVR to record, where a bunch of famous artists are doing a stay-at-home concert, which is kind of cool. It's going to be on every channel, so odds are you won't miss it. So make sure you tune in for that. But yeah, it's really fun to kind of see different ones coming out. And you know, a lot of regular people like you and me are also doing fun things. I watched a friend of mine who, she was my personal trainer a few years ago when I was doing the gym thing. And she has evolved into being an actress and a director. And she did this really fun thing with her daughter. And I was thinking, man, everyone should do this. But, you know, so her and her daughter interviewed each other in front of the camera inside the bedroom. And the daughter asked the mother questions about, like she would say to her mom, what was I like as a baby? And then, you know, she asked her mom, what were you like when you were 15 years old like I was? And it was really fun to watch. You know, it was like, I don't know, 3-4 minutes long or something. But I was like, that was actually kind of great. And I'd love to see more people do that type of thing. I mean, obviously you have to be invested in that person enough to care about their answers. But there's so much available online that even though we're separated physically from each other right now, we can still kind of feel a connection with others that, you know, we care about, even on some minor level. And yeah, no, that was really a fun thing to watch too. And I told her, keep doing those. Those are great. So plus it's more family bonding, which is great. I've been spending a lot of time on the phone with family members lately, obviously, because we can't see each other. And it's been, it's really nice that we have the internet and we have FaceTime and Skype and whatever else you want to use. Khalid says, does GFO remove any beneficial nutrients or bacteria from the tank? No, it just bonds with phosphate to help remove it, to export it. Looks like I'm running out of questions. Actually, I'm way behind on the chat still. Marcus says they do make the hose clamps in titanium as well. Yeah, that's true, but the plastic ones cost nothing and they're easy to apply with like a pair of pliers. So I really do like that. And Sen Reefer says, I want to win something. It's great. I'm going to show this to you guys. I only have a few of these in stock, but I just want to make you guys aware that I have them because I can ship them out. Let's go to the shop, go to dry goods. So it's a new product from Brightwell. And we'll see if this fits the screen. See what happens. So scoot this over a little bit. So this product right here from Brightwell, oh, yeah, I just want to make sure I had the right window. This is a Microbacter dry rock starter kit. It's actually a kit designed to cycle your tank. And the cool thing is, according to them, you can cycle your tank in about 8 days instead of 21. So that little bottle is the ammonia. Then they have the Microbacter accelerant, and then the final one is the Microbacter clean that is used for several weeks or months to kind of get through the ugly stages that our dry rock tends to go through over the first 3 months. So this is an all-in-one kit that they released recently, and as soon as I heard about it, I thought, man, everyone starts their tank with dry rock. This sounds fantastic, so I stuck it on my website for you guys. So if you're interested in getting that, the kit is $30. And shipping is, I don't know, it's not a really heavy kit. It might cost like $9 or $10 to ship it to you priority mail. So if it's something you're thinking about doing or need, I have about 6 of these kits in stock. All right. Insane Reefer says, how would you go by running a Trident in conjunction with a calcium reactor and 2-part? It's rather complex, but it's definitely doable. So what you do first of all is you get the calcium reactor running. And it's just maintaining your tank for what it needs. And then you get the Trident installed, and it will now measure the alkaline, calcium, and magnesium multiple times a day. And then you can have your 2-part set up with a dosing apparatus of some kind, whether it's the dose or Versa or BRS dosing pumps or whatever. And what you can do is you can actually tell via the Trident and through your Apex system, you can say, if the alkaline is lower than this number, start to dose my 2-part. And you can have it dose in a specific amount, which might be 20 milliliters. It shouldn't be an on-off situation where it's just, I don't think it should be just an on-off, because if it tests your alkaline at 6 p.m. and your alkaline is lower than you want it to be, which means the calcium reactor did not provide enough, and you just say turn on the dosing pump, the dosing pump would stay on for the next 6 hours until it tests alkaline again at midnight. That's a long time to just keep adding. So I feel like, and I'd have to check into it because I don't do this, but I feel like you would have to say, dose this amount. And it would literally dose like whatever it is, let's say 20 milliliters of alkalinity. And you're not going to be able to do anything else after that until it measures again, like I said, at midnight, which is 6 hours later. But at 6 hours later, you could see if it went up or not. And then you could actually physically have it dose again, another 20 milliliters. And you would basically add 20 every 6 hours until it finally gets to the right level, and then it's going to stop the 2-part dosing entirely. Well, really, it's 1 part. We haven't even talked about calcium. But Terrence has this set up, so he'd be a great person to ask this question, how to do it, because he feels that it's really smart to have the calcium reactor do 90% of the load and use your 2-part to handle the last 10%. That way, if there's any problem with the calcium reactor whatsoever, you can, in theory, even remotely, change some settings in Fusion to start dosing more and more of the 2-part to handle it while you're still like on vacation. And that's a whole other topic, because if you're on vacation, you're supposed to not be thinking about your tank. You're supposed to be winding down and relaxing and enjoying the view. And if you are on vacation just looking at Fusion and stressing about your tank, I'm thinking you're not enjoying your vacation very much at all. So I have a tank sitter. I have it set up to where he can use Fusion if he needs to, and he can make adjustments if necessary, which never happens. But I kind of just, when I go out the door, I try not to look back. I might possibly open Fusion once or twice while I'm out of town just to kind of take a look at something or show someone, hey, look, you know, that kind of thing. But I'm not like looking for what's going wrong. That's what the tank sitter's for. They come over and they look for what's wrong in person. And it's just really important to realize that if you're setting up programming to do something, like add more alkalinity, for example, it will keep adding it nonstop until the next test. And that's something we don't think about. We don't think that way. We see the number like, oh, the number's not good, so I need more of this, and we put it in. But then if you didn't have any of this gear, if you had no Trident, if you had no Fusion, if you had nothing, you just took out your test kit today, alkaline was low, what do? You mix up a certain amount, you use the Reef chemistry calculator, it says you need 3.5 tablespoons of this stuff, you mix it up, you pour it in the tank, and then you just assume and go about your life thinking the alkaline is back where it belongs, or you test the tank again a couple hours from now and verify that you put in enough. And then you wouldn't test again for a week, right? I mean, isn't that pretty much the normal way? We just don't even think about it. But the Trident measuring every 6 hours is always giving us the latest number that happened over the last 6-hour period. I mean, it's going to be at midnight, at 6 a.m., at noon, at 6 p.m. That's the latest. So whenever you, like right now, it's 4:15. So if I were to check Fusion, it would show the alkaline that happened at noon. So whatever alkaline was at noon, that's what it shows on my watch, it's what it shows on my phone, it shows on my computer. And then I would, be aware of the number. I like to use the Trident more as a monitor rather than a controller, but I have an entire blog about how I've gotten my Trident talking to my calcium reactor, and it limits the calcium reactor when the number gets a little too high, and then it turns off the limiter when it needs to come up slightly. But I don't have the 2-part incorporated. That's the part I don't want to add one more complexity to my life. So that's what I'm saying, talk to Terrence, because he did it. Austin Gray said, I had ick in my tank a few weeks ago and all my fish seem to have fought it off now. My question is did the ick die off since the fish fought it off, or can it still live off of them in the tank? Yeah, no, it's still there. It's just not presently visible. Your fish have enough immune system to fight it off, but if any parameter really swings hard, like the tank gets too hot, the alkalinity drops, the alkalinity spikes, oxygen levels get too low for some reason, salinity swings wildly for some weird reason because of a mistake, you could suddenly see the ick all reappear instantly because the fish are stressed and it just appears. So that is the downside of it. Just kind of took care of itself in the background. It really didn't. It's just your fish are now healthy enough to handle not looking infected. The Grim Reaper says, I've heard you mention a few times that zoanthids like dirty water. How would you make it dirty? Basically what we're talking about is that zoanthids in nature grow in areas where there's a lot of nutrients in the water. And they will be in areas of the reef that is near runoff from the land, so to speak. And they are found in muddy areas, actually. It's not always on some pristine rock. And I'll tell you, I have been diving, how many times? Not a lot, less than 50 times. But every time I go on a dive, it's a place that's awesome. You know, I don't want to just to dive. I want to dive to make it worth my trip. And when I go diving, I always look for zoanthids. And I have probably only seen zoanthids 3 times successfully. And whenever I found them, I was completely by myself. My buddy was off looking at something else. And I'm like, look, I found zoanthids, because they're so small, the ocean's so big. And I'm just like, I found the mother lode. And it's like a patch this big, you know. But it's not like one polyp. It's like a collective, you know. It's awesome. And I'm there trying to take a few pictures. And of course, they all look like garbage, and I'm not happy. But it's not something you just see everywhere on the reef. You actually have to find them. And I've been told by those that collect zoanthids that they get them from areas that you know, are really nutrient heavy. So that's what I mean by dirty water. When we talk about our reef tanks, SPS corals like pristine water, LPS corals like, you know, middle of the range water, and zoanthids like dirty water. That's what we're talking about. Let's see, scrolling past all that. Sorry, I'm just looking for more questions. There's a lot of chatter in here. I did not know that. Marcus says they use lanthanum in the medical field for the same thing, but in blood. I didn't know I mean, I guess everything is used for medicine, but I had never thought of that being used for controlling phosphate in our bodies, I guess. It's interesting. Rider in Black says, I'm running GFO, but my clown, Tang, and goldfish seem stressed in my 5-gallon. Any idea why? Well, yeah, you've got 3 different types of animals in the wrong environment entirely. That was funny. I think the goldfish will probably survive. That was funny. Nesty says, isn't GFO just a temporary fix? I mean, once you take out the GFO, the nitrates will rise and you will have issues with algae and corals. I thought, what is the proper way of keeping PO3? Okay, there's so much going on in that paragraph. Bottom line is, it's not a temporary fix. It is the method most people like to use to control PO4, which is phosphates in the water. And so they hook up a GFO reactor to constantly pull out a little bit of phosphate from the water on a regular basis, and hopefully pull out a little bit more than what's in the tank already, so it keeps diminishing. And after a while, its effectiveness wears off and has to be replaced with new media. So it's not a temporary fix. If you're going to call anything a temporary fix, it's going to be the Phosphate Rx, which is what I use, because I use it every couple of months versus something I use every single day. And I find that GFO was too much work for me. I didn't enjoy it. It seemed like a hassle. And that's why I prefer to go a different route. And that's why I've done what I've done for the last 10, 12 years. But the other end of the question you asked was, when you remove it, does the nitrates, it doesn't even affect nitrates. GFO does not do anything beneficial for nitrates. It doesn't raise them, doesn't lower them, doesn't help them, doesn't add to them. It's 100% a totally different topic. Now, the higher the nutrients in the tank, the more likely nuisance algae will grow. But then there's something else that wasn't even brought into this equation. Now we're talking about chemistry here, but the other part is actually having a cleanup crew in your tank that will eat algae, and it will pick the rocks clean, and it will find the crevices, and it'll eat the decay, and it helps keep the tank clean. And if you are not stocking your tank with enough cleanup crew, your system is being starved of a very important part of the ecosystem. So you've got to have hermit crabs, you've got to have snails. I highly recommend an urchin or two. I like to have a serpent starfish in there. And I like Nacerius snails in the sand bed. A fighting conch or a sand conch would be down in the sand as well. These are all different parts of the crew, and they all work together to help keep the tank clean so you don't have to deal with algae issues. Sky and Sea says, I have a desktop reef with a hella bright light, but only medium flow. Coral recommendations? Not sure what you can do with that light because it's so bright. I think it's going to be blinding you all the time. You might want to do something to kind of like not have it hit you in the eyes at your desk. But you're going to want tiny things because it's a desktop reef, which means there's only a limited amount of space. You might want a fungia down there or a scolie. You might want some zoanthids, maybe a little tiny gorgonian, some tiny fish, porcelain crab, sexy shrimp. It just comes down to the amount of space you have in the tank, but I'm trying to think things that are colorful. Kryptonite candy canes are really pretty in a small tank, and they're kind of a, none of the things I described are fast growers, so they're not going to take over and ruin the look. You can actually set up a really pretty biotope on your desktop. And if your light really is as bright as you described, pretty much any livestock will be fine. Plus, it's a small tank. It only has so much water to penetrate. Odds are everything's going to do well. Corey says, do you know anything that eats pineapple sponges, vermitid snails, and or small feather dusters? I hate the way they look. Is the only answer a good quarantine. All right, so let's tackle these one at a time. Pineapple sponges are filter feeders. The reason they exist is because your tank is exactly right for them to be prolific. You can scrape them all off and just get rid of them. The only thing that I know eats sponges categorically is angelfish. But angelfish also may eat coral. So it might be just easier for you to handle the problem of what you don't like there. Now the vermitid snails, they're making a tube that's calcified, and the snail or the worm lives inside that tube, and he casts a web. I agree with you, those are a pain in the butt. And the easiest method is to break off the tube and glue the hole shut. The second method is break off the tube and take a dental tool and break off the rest of his shell to get it off the rock entirely, just ripping it off and getting it out of the tank manually. And then also, if you don't do either of those, break off the tube and add hermit crabs, and they will reach in with their claws and they will pull out the worm and eat it. So there's that method as well. And then the third thing you mentioned was small feather dusters. Butterfly fish eat feather dusters, but depends what size your tank is, if it can handle the bioload. In other words, is there enough to keep the butterfly alive? Or will it just eat these and then it die? Or are you just going to get the butterfly temporarily, solve the problem, catch the fish, and bring it back to the fish store? So a lot of times finding something that will eat something in your tank that you don't like can be a problem once that thing is gone, because now the diet has been removed from the animal in question. So you want to make sure that the animal has a new home planned to where to go to. But vermitids, yeah, I agree, that is your biggest offender. The Gfo sponges are no big deal. They're just little, I think they're kind of neat, actually. If anything, it makes me know my tank is healthy. And the feather dusters, they never really bothered me, but if you have the kind that has like the brown papery shell and they're just growing everywhere, I used to grab those off by the fistful and give them away to people. So giving them away is the best solution. You can also peel them off, and if you have no one to give them to, and you don't want to put them in the refugium to live down there, you could just throw them away. Glenn Smith says, is there any problems with placing frozen food in the aquarium before it's defrosted? Sometimes we can be in a rush. It's not a problem. I've got friends that do it. I don't. I choose to melt all the food, and then after 15 minutes, I pour it in the tank and it goes everywhere, and everyone can chase their meal down. I've seen people throw frozen food in their tanks and let the fish just chew on it frozen. And then I ask them, do you do the same thing for yourself with a hamburger patty? I'm like, no. I'm like, ah. So, I mean, you know, we take the hamburger patty out of the freezer, we fry it or we throw it on the grill. You know, we don't eat it frozen. But we do eat ice cream sandwiches out of the freezer. So, I mean, you know, I don't know. Just seems like if their main food can't be melted in time, maybe when you're in a rush, use pellet food or flake food instead in a pinch, and use the frozen food when you have time to actually thaw it out for a few minutes. It's kind of important to set a reminder to yourself to melt it in time before you have to rush out the door. I mean, that's one method that might work. Like, if you know you're leaving at 8, set a timer at 7:30 to remind you to melt some fish food. That gives you 30 minutes to get it melted and in the tank and make sure everything's good before you head out the door. Just some suggestions. Man, someone is really trolling today. Jake says, have you ever had a bad bottle of Hannah Checker liquid? My new bottle tested 7.4, the old bottle tested 10.3, which I confirmed with the Red Sea test kit. And API tested 10. So this is supposed to be the Hannah alkalinity checker is what we're talking about, based on all these numbers you're describing. They should have an expiration date on the bottle. They also, I mean, you said it's the new bottle, right? Yeah, the new bottle. I mean, it sounds like the bottle's suspect. I would get a hold of Hannah and see if you can get the bottle replaced. That'd be my guess. Corey, thank you very much for the super chat. And yeah, the acrylic products that come out, you know, they're just as they pop into my head or, you know, someone requests it. I try not to copy other people. I try to think of things in my own head. And I'm like, oh, this would be nice. So sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I think I'll have these brick holders on my website very soon, probably this week. I think it'll be convenient for people to kind of organize their power bricks. All right. I think we're going to start wrapping this up. Reefer says, do you use Algae Barn? I've only gotten from Algae Barn a couple times when I was at the trade shows. I don't order from them online. I could, I just haven't. I actually am on their email list, so I get their emails pretty regularly. Let's see. Nesty says, forget GFO, let's talk about aptasia control with fish. What fish or inverter is best for the job without risking SPS or LPS? That is the challenge. That's the hard part because you're wanting some kind of fish to take care of a problem, but not also be interested in eating other things. For aptasia, the Bergia and nudibranch is a really good choice because that is their only diet. So in theory, everything else in your tank would be safe. If you wanted to go the route of a filefish or a copperband butterfly, they do eat aptasia, but they may attack acans or other things. So there is kind of a risk there, and that's super challenging. I sell a product in my shop called F Aptasia, and it is designed to kill them completely dead and get rid of them once and for all. And it's gotten a lot of really good reviews from a lot of people. It was actually a write-up about it in Reef Builders recently. So I've been selling it for the last couple of months. And you might choose to use that instead of a fish to solve the problem in your tank. Asked and answered. Tank Tool says, I just got a bubble coral that's growing too fast. Ever had the guts or success fragging one? No, I've never tried to frag a bubble coral. You would have to, I don't even know where to start. The answer is no. Sorry. If it's growing too fast, you need a bigger tank. How about that? Problem solved. Let's see. Jamie says, are there any reactors you do suggest starting to use on a 160 gallon right at the start? No. When you start your tank, all you're going to do is get rock and sand in there and cycle it. You don't even run a skimmer yet. You don't run carbon. You don't do anything. You cycle the tank. And then after the tank is cycled and you got some livestock in there, now you start your protein skimmer. And then a couple months later, you add the refugium. And maybe around that time, you might want to run a reactor with some carbon just to kind of clarify the water and remove any smell, and just to polish the system. And then later, if you start seeing measurements of phosphate or nitrate, then you might consider going into some kind of a reactor to handle one or both, like biopellets for nitrate, GFO, or you could use the liquid lanthanomes like I was suggesting earlier for phosphate control. Chad says, should I run the refugium light 24/7 when battling dinoflagellates or not run it at all? I don't know what kind I have, but it's super chunky and only on the rocks. Super chunky dinoflagellates. Dinoflagellates almost always look snotty, slimy, with bubbles in them, not chunky. I'm wondering if maybe you're not dealing with dinos at all, but you're dealing with cyanobacteria, which is more like a blanket. So I would suggest you turn off your blue lights and turn on some white lights, or use a flashlight and actually look at the tank under white light and see what you're actually dealing with. The refugium, what plants are you growing that needs lights 24/7 anyway? Because there are two types of caulerpa that need it just to prevent it from dying, going sexual. But there's other caulerpas that still don't. I have caulerpa in my refugiums, and they only get 9 hours of light a day. Now, turning off all the light in your entire system is a common practice when trying to get rid of dinoflagellates. So that would include the refugium. You could always take the plants out of the refugium and put them in a bucket with a small power head and somehow screen it so the plants don't clog up the power head, because you need the water to keep circulating. And then you could put it near a window where it gets daylight to keep the plants happy while you're dealing with the problem you have with your tank. That's an option too. You can even take plants that are dirty in your refugium, and you can set up a series of buckets in a row with salt water, and you can shake off the plants in bucket 1, then take them and shake them off in bucket 2, and then take them and shake them off in bucket 3, and then finally shake them off in bucket 4, and now the plant's like a lot cleaner. And then you throw away all that dirty water, and now you have nice clean algae that you can put back in your refugium. Insane Reefer says, can you overdose the iodine and strontium supplements that come with Prodibio? I don't believe you can. The vials are rated for a very wide margin, and I just follow their directions. I've never tried to put in more than what my tank needed. Basically, if it's, I use the Pro vials, and I believe my Pro vials are rated for, I think it's 250 to 500 gallons, and my systems are 450, so I put in one vial and of each, and I've never had any surprises. And when I got my ICP test back, I didn't have any weird numbers either. I didn't have spikes in these numbers or dropouts. They weren't too low either. Milton says, why does the tank look like this during the stream? I can't really see it. You're right, you can't. It's just my tank behind me. It never looks good on the live stream. If I were to somehow get the tank to look right, then I would look like a black silhouette. And so it's just a backdrop. I mean, it's the real tank. It's not like a green screen. But to actually see the tank, you can watch the video that's on my channel that shows the tank in full detail. I'll get you that link here in 1 second. Well, probably about 30 seconds. Let's see. I'm looking for a playlist. It's too much stuff on my screen. Can't get to everything. So we will find this for you. There we go. Copy link. So here's a video of my tank that was filmed back, well, it was released January 1st, I think, or January 2nd. And that right there will show you my entire system with nice close-ups. You'll see the tank under white light. You'll see the tank under blue light. So you can see the corals when they're glowing. The first 20 minutes or so are white lighting, so it won't be as interesting. And then, you know, the last 10 minutes will be great. It'll be that crazy nightclub glow. I'm considering the thought of maybe just filming my tank like in 4K and just project it on my television and stand in front of the television. I haven't tried it yet. I'm not sure what will happen with reflections and stuff, and you know, because the TV is bolted to the wall and the door is there and the light coming in may be a problem. I don't know. I'll have to mess around and see if we can come up with a better backdrop. But that might be the solution to where you can actually really appreciate the tank and it'll look nice and it won't be what it is. But I know I've had some people actually say, you know, your tank looks like crap. I can't believe you even talk. You sound like you know what you're talking about, but your tanks are awful. But then when they finally watch the video, they're like, oh, that tank is awesome. Like, yeah, if you came here in person, you'd really get something nice to enjoy. Nick says, would you ever consider building an all-in-one hang-on refugium and dosing container? Is it possible? I haven't. One of my big concerns is I like to build things that last for a long time and won't let go. And I've always been a little paranoid about building something that hangs on the outside of a tank. I know companies do it. I just worry. So I haven't done that. And you're talking about a refugium and multiple containers. There's a whole bunch of water volume there involved, you know, whether alkaline, calcium, magnesium, acropower, NOPOX, whatever it is, and then the refugium itself. And if it just broke off or fell off or caused chaos, you might be mad at me later. And it's like, well, that's why I don't like doing it. So I'd almost rather, if it was a thing, make it to where it stands on the back of the tank, like on the surface that the tank is on. So like, let's say the tank stand had more wood in the back and you could set it down behind the aquarium and it's sitting there where it can't fall, where it's not being hanging off a bracket. That's a possibility. I don't know. A lot of people ask me to make things that are very small or that have a very little bit of space in them. And I can't always do that because the material I use, number one, is thick. It's 1/4 inch or larger. And a lot of things that people are really thinking of, they're like nuanced little items. They're really best made with 1/8 inch acrylic. They're really skinny, they're thin, they're flimsy. Like I said, you know, even this little thing I made here, I made this out of 1/4 inch acrylic, and it's going to last me forever. You know, it's not going to let me down. It's not going to do anything weird. It's not going to bow or warp or anything like that. It's not going to crack. It's bulletproof. And I'm going to dangle something off of it that weighs nothing. And that's the end of that, and I'll never make it again. But I see what you're saying. You know, I don't know. I'm not saying no. I'm not at this time. Let's see. All right, guys. You know what? We're at the end of the chat. I did it. I got to the bottom, and I did it in, I was going to say in less than 2.5 hours, but no, 2 hours and 33 minutes. All right, well, we tried. Today is Water Test Saturday. It's very important that you test your water and find out what's going on with your tank. We've been talking about water parameters this entire episode, and it really would be good if you walked away from this and you said, you know what? I'm going to go test my water right now, like Mark said to, because that way you know if your tank needs anything and you can make corrections now, before things go wrong. Don't ever assume everything is fine. Just don't assume it. Just know it. If all your numbers come back and they are fine, that's fantastic. And that means you don't have to make any changes. You have just verified that all is well. And that's how it should be. That's how we want it to be. But if there's anything that's a little askew, you can fix it now. And then for the next week, your tank will adjust to that new parameter change and hopefully do even better. Other than that, guys, stay safe. And, I hope that you'll all be okay. And, we'll keep doing our live streams each week. I think everything for the rest of the year has been canceled. I don't think I'll be traveling anywhere. If I go anywhere at all this year, it's going to be to see family. But other than that, all the big events have pretty much been postponed. I feel like 2020 is done, and we should just advance to 2021 now. I feel like we should just reboot the year, but we can't. We have to live through this thing, and hopefully it'll all get better. Guys, have a great weekend, and I will see you guys in Club Meals Reef on Facebook throughout the week. And if you place any orders, I will try my best to get them out as quickly as I can. Thanks. Bye, guys.